Greetings, everyone. Greg Bolden here, America Emboldened. We're going to be bringing up my good friend Chris Michaels as well, because it is interview night and it's our favorite guest that we host. We're having them on about once every quarter. It's been a blast having these conversations, and I'm still laughing because, quite honestly, we just had a wild time right before we're hitting the record button in conversation. So I know that tonight's episode and our conversation may be one of the most spirited and fun ones that we've had so far. Who's the guest, you might wonder? Well, it's our good friend, Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, the scholar, the researcher, the author himself, diving into works, deep ends of history, hidden technology, geopolitics, ancient civilizations, and the shadows where power often prefers to live. There's nothing really off the table with him. That's what we absolutely love talking to him about. It's always a blast, and today is going to be no different than all those other conversations. So we're glad that you guys are here for that conversation with us today. Chris Michaels, bring you up to the stage real quick. How you doing?
Oh, I'm pretty good. I am in an ornery mood, but I'm glad that we get to speak with Dr. Joseph Farrell today. He's one of our favorite guests. And boy, oh boy, does he have a book that came out, the Rialto and Richmond Reconstructed. I mean, you will never look at the Civil War the same way ever again after reading that book.
Well, I've always, we talked to him about this when he wrote the first book about the dark money. Like, where did all the funds go? When the South disbanded, who took what? And how is that influencing modern culture? So I'm looking forward. You've read the book. I'm in full insight to everybody. I have not had an opportunity to read it yet, but you have. So I'm going to let you take the lead on this. But let's hit our roll welcoming Dr. Farrell.
Ladies and gentlemen, America Emboldened presents Dr. Joseph P. Farrell.
All right, Dr. Farrell, welcome.
Hi, guys.
What? Who was this?
Well, I went into the bathroom. I was like, ladies. You get the voice going, you get the echo, and you give them a proper intro.
What were you doing in the bathroom to emote this?
I don't want to know.
Acoustics.
Oh, acoustics. I see. Okay.
I was practicing my tones, my hymns.
Oh, I see. All right. Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, hi, Joseph.
I told you it's going to be a great conversation today. I can't wait. I'm feeling it.
Yeah, I bet you are after that trip to the bathroom.
After that, yes.
Everything came out all right.
I'm glad to hear it. Glad to hear it.
Everything always comes out in the end. But anyway.
Oh, my goodness. Joseph, how have you been?
Well, after our pre-recording conversation, I am thoroughly oxygenated, so I'm doing okay.
For people that don't know, we have a green room on America Emboldened, and we do a comedy act. We're thinking about taking it on the road.
You can purchase your tickets now.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we work blue though. You have to keep that in mind.
Don't bring your children.
Yeah, do not bring the children. Maybe it's a little like an insult comic kind of deal with
Joseph is the shock jock of alternative history.
He certainly is.
Well, after having defamed my late great aunt Gladys,
yeah, right.
They don't know that. They don't know that.
Don't say that too loudly. You never know. Oh my goodness. Okay. Moving right along.
I guess we have a show to do. We have an interview to conduct.
Oh, okay. So, as we mentioned, Dr. Joseph Farrell, he's written the book, The Rialto and Richmond Reconstructed, Confederates, Canada, and Carpetbaggers. Like I said, after reading this book, you will not look at the Civil War nor the aftermath the same ever again. This information that Dr. Joseph Farrell has presented to us seems as though that this whole war is the same as every single other war that we've seen today. a lot of espionage, a lot of foreign powers involved, a lot of elites that just want to make things go their way. And Dr. Joseph Farrell has done an excellent job of exposing, potentially, these networks that were in operation during the Civil War and after. So, Dr. Joseph Farrell, where did you come up with all of this information? Particularly, how did you uncover people that were involved in this? But specifically, the one individual who I think is just crazy, Sanford Conover, George Margrave, James Watson Wallace, a.k.a. Charles Dunham. Like, go into this character with us. Who is this guy?
This guy is a fellow that in the book I call the impresario of imposture, because there is a renewed scholarly attention and focus on this. We'll just loosely call him a gentleman. He was a fraud, a mountebank, a grifter, you name it, a gaslighter, a fake journalist, and so on and so forth. There's been renewed scholarly interest, but this guy was so obscure until very recently, when the University of Illinois did a study of him. And the gentleman that wrote the study, I believe his surname was Carman, C-A-R-M-A-N, but in any case, the study presents Dunham, and you listed a bunch of his aliases: Margrave, Conover, all of these aliases that he invented for himself throughout the Civil War. This gentleman, the scholar interprets as a kind of well-accomplished con man and grifter. And what I do in the book is I simply rely on this study. And by the way, it's the only study of this man out there. And here's something that should be a big, huge clue to everybody. When we say the names of the principal big names that were involved with the war between the states: Jefferson Davis, Abraham Lincoln, Robert E. Lee, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, General Grant, we all have pictures of these men in our mind because they all have pictures. You can look and see what they looked like. There is only one major character in the whole Civil War story that has not a picture, not a daguerreotype, not a pen and ink, not a painting, not a sketch. Nowhere is there any visual imprint of what this man looked like. And to me, that's a huge clue. So what I do is I interpret this man less as a self-appointed fraud, mountebank, and grifter just using the opportunity of the war to feather his own nest. I interpret him as an agent, an espionage agent. Because everything that he does, writing fake articles in newspapers on both sides of the war.
Exactly.
He's active in the Union. He's active in the Confederacy. He has a pipeline directly to the Union Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, and we both know what a wonderful character he was.
No.
Not the slightest bit of suspicion about that man. President Lincoln was surrounded by some real snakes, and that's probably the biggest viper in the pit.
Secretary of War.
Secretary of War, yes, absolutely. So this guy Dunham was on both sides of the war, and here's the kicker. And to me, this is what spells espionage agent par excellence. Oh, by the way, he makes it up to Canada too. So we'll get to that part of the story. All right.
Yes.
So he infiltrates himself into the Confederate lines in 1862 and 63. The Confederates arrest the guy on suspicion of espionage, but there's no evidence. So they eventually release him and pass him back through the lines back into the Union. And while he's pottering around Richmond, when he's still running free, he inspects the Richmond defenses. He claims to have been involved in the test of an experimental cannon, which I'm assuming was probably a rifled cannon of some sort that the Confederacy was developing, and so on and so forth. And then when he gets back to the Union, the first thing he does is he fires off a letter to the Secretary of War, Stanton. And then he writes a letter to President Lincoln. Okay. And in the letter to President Lincoln, he says, well, it would be possible to go down there and kidnap the Confederate leadership and hold them hostage. Now, please note, this is the same guy that in 1864, after a brief trip to Canada, writes a similar article for Horace Greeley's New York Post, where he urges the president of the Union, Abraham Lincoln, to beware of a kidnapping plot. So in other words, kidnap Jefferson Davis and his cabinet, kidnap Abraham Lincoln and his cabinet, and hold them ransom and end the war. So in other words, I'm viewing this guy, Chris, bottom line here, and I'm omitting gobs of detail, because this guy appears to me to be the quintessential espionage agent and, above all, agent provocateur. And he plays that role very, very well. In fact, let's fast forward the tape just a bit to let you know some of the other things that this guy is involved with. He is the chief witness. This guy is the chief witness against the 4 conspirators that were eventually hung for involvement in Abraham Lincoln's assassination plot. Okay, this guy is the chief witness. And he perjures himself on the stand. And by the way, he doesn't even testify under his own name.
Ooh,
okay?
What did he testify under?
Conover, I believe it was, or Sanders, one of those two. Now, I don't recall right off the top of my head.
Sure.
So he's the chief witness that the Judge Advocate General, Joseph Holt, who chairs this whole military tribunal, acknowledges is the chief witness that did the most damage against the conspirators. Later on, Holt goes before a trial, in a civil trial, answering charges of perjury, and the judge is just, I wrote about this in the book, the judge doesn't know what to do because they're trying one guy for perjury based on the perjured testimony of another guy. Okay, so on and on this goes. And then eventually when Dunham is found guilty of perjury and sentenced to prison, then what does he do? He writes President Andrew Johnson, who, by the way, gives him a pardon. Now, folks, this is beyond being a grifter, okay? If Israel were around at that time, I would have said, this guy is Mossad.
Well, I was thinking he might be like early CIA, like that.
No.
But
you know who I think he is?
Who?
British intelligence.
Yes. Absolutely.
Canada. Remember the Canada connection.
Yes.
And by the way, while he's in Canada, guess who he's there at the same time with?
Who?
John Wilkes Booth.
My goodness, what a small world.
What a small world.
Wow.
It's
I'm sure they were just getting tea and biscuits.
They were just getting tea and biscuits along with Jay Cook, the financier, the DuPonts, the mayor of New York, getting the picture. Okay?
Globalist.
By the way, along with that little Confederate cell up there that Jefferson Davis decided to fund in 1864 after the Dahlgren raid, because he wanted to make sure that Lincoln lost the 1864 election. So you've got a Confederate Secret Service cell on top of everything else in Montreal.
This is why I wanted to bring up him first, because he seems to be such a linchpin throughout your book on what could have potentially happened with the Civil War and how the international interests were involved in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
It seems as though that not much has changed into 2020 and 2025. You have this guy under different names creating
Yes.
articles to generate a narrative. Like you said,
Right.
this screams intelligence.
Yeah, it does.
It screams
does.
intelligence. Now, what would be the supposed motives to create this kind of discord on behalf of a foreign power?
I think you have to read the Rialto and Richmond Reconstructed very carefully, because I'm intentionally trying to suggest a narrative by reading between the lines.
Right.
And the narrative, I think that has to be addressed, and the Rialto and Richmond has to be read after the first book, because the two books really do belong together. Because some of the little loose ends that are left loose in the first book are answered in the second book. Like, what happened to all that Confederate debt?
Yeah.
Okay. The Confederacy ran up about $990 million worth of debt during the war. The Union, I think, was somewhere around $1.3 billion of debt. So in other words, the debt that both sides accumulated at the end of the war was massive. The Confederate debt basically ended up being financed by the European powers, principally England and France. Okay. The Union attempted to recover some of those funds, but as late as the 1880s, there are still massive amounts of funds in England on Confederate accounts. This is key. This is key. So if you are a bondholder of sovereign Confederate debt, like the Erlanger loan that I wrote about in the first book, if you are a holder of Confederate debt, and all of a sudden, like one of the holders being, oh, by the way, William Gladstone, okay, so we're not dealing with Johnny Cockney on the East End of London being a holder of Confederate bonds. No, we're talking about the very upper crust of British society, including members of the Queen's Privy Council. Okay, that's how far it goes. So if you're these financiers, you want to recoup your losses. So how do you do that? You ensure that in the post-war Reconstruction period, the tension between the two sections endures. And then you put a lien on the labor of the South, black and white. What's the lien? It's called Reconstruction. And the way they do this is, to me, the principal lesson that we have to take away. The way they do this is they, first of all, by a sleight of hand that left my jaw on the floor, they convert the Lincoln greenback into the same dang type of currency as used by the Confederacy. Let me repeat that.
Right.
They convert the Lincoln greenback into the same kind of currency as used by the Confederacy. And I think I'm probably the only one out there that has caught that. After doing that, they then say, okay, because we are going to treat the greenback that way, we have to be able to redeem it. We have to be able to resume specie payments in exchange for a greenback at banks in the Union. Okay? So in other words, the greenback, when it was first issued, was a debt-free fiat money that was not a convertible currency.
Right.
You couldn't take it to the bank and say, give me a gold dollar for this $1 Lincoln greenback. The Resumption Act, after the end of the war, attempts to do this. But here's the kicker. The United States, constitutionally, the constitutional money system in the United States prior to the war between the states was a bimetallic standard, gold and silver. And that old standard, by the way, you'll read about in Babylon's Banksters. There's a reason I'm doing all of this in such a long series of books. They're all related. Because when you have a bimetallic standard, the first thing you can do is manipulate the ratio. of exchange between the two. After the war, the Resumption Act, again, this is just pure stealthy sleight of hand. The Resumption Act resumes payment in gold only. Silver is demonetized. And so what does that do? It puts the post-war United States of America into a massive deflationary cycle. This is the reason why William Jennings Bryan is screaming about the cross of gold in 1896 to win the Democratic presidential nomination. This is exactly why. And the other thing is that we know this deflationary policy was intentional is for two reasons. Number one, the most significant reason that I get to in the book is that at that time, there is a worldwide movement confined mostly to the United States and Europe to put the entire world on a modified monometallic gold standard based around the French franc. And if you study the system that they're trying to put into play, and by the way, senators like Senator John Sherman, brother of William Tecumseh in Ohio, are on board with this scheme. Okay, so remember Sherman's March. What is he doing? He's plowing his way through Georgia and grabbing all the silver and gold.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in other words, you really have to read between the lines here, folks. So they're attempting to put into place this world monometallic gold standard system based on the French franc. Now study that system long enough and you'll discover it's very similar to the snake system in the 20th century based on the German Deutschmark, where other currencies were allowed to float with exchange rates tied to the Deutschmark. Okay? So this is what they're trying to put into place in the 19th century on the gold French franc, okay? The other thing that tells you that this is a deliberate policy of deflation and thereby placing a lien on the labor, principally of the South, because it's the Southern poor black and poor white that are hit the hardest by these policies. The other big tip-off is what happens during the Civil War and immediately after. You have a significant discovery, and it's called the Comstock lode in Nevada. Right. The big, huge silver deposits outside of Carson City and Silver Dollar City, Nevada. I've been there. I've been to the place. And that lode was estimated to be worth approximately $250 million worth in 1865 dollars. That's a lot of silver. And by the way, just for kicks and giggles, guess who is out there scratching around in the Nevada desert compiling geological reports on how big that lode is?
Could it be somebody from Saxony?
Baron von Richthofen.
My goodness.
The same family as the Red Baron fighter ace of World War I is the guy preparing the geological reports for the Johnson administration on how much silver is there. And my question that no one has asked or satisfactorily answered is what in the name of sense is a German baron doing in Nevada compiling geological reports for Johnson?
And then you get all of the airship mysteries coming out of the West,
ding,
too.
Ding, ding.
That whole aspect, I think, can be tied together.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, at the end of Rialto and Richmond, I point out something that my friend Walter Bosley pointed out, and that was, and this you can find in Tim Busby's book, excellent book called The 19th Century Airship Mystery. In that book, Busby points out, and I reprise the quotation in Rialto and Richmond with Walter's suggestive analysis. In that book, Busby points out that there was an American inventor tied with the airships during the Civil War that had approached President Lincoln to develop this technology. He did a couple of demonstrations of whatever this contraption was that apparently flew around at speeds of about 200 miles an hour. Lincoln backed the project, took it to Congress, and asked Congress to fund it. And that means, guess who knows all about this whole plan? Edwin Stanton. Yeah, Mr. Goody Two Shoes, Mr. Nothing to See Here, So the interesting thing about what the doctor who's inventing this contraption, whatever the heck it was, he says, well, this can all be funded by, here it comes, folks, greenbacks. So now we have a high technology being developed in secret by the Union with the approval of President Lincoln and being financed by greenbacks. Now, if you're over in Europe and you get wind of this, is this a cause for concern? Answer, yes. Now, just to flesh this out even more, to put the cherry on the sundae, where do all of these airships in the 19th century tend to end up? Texas.
Yep.
Texas. In fact, they start ending up there right as the Civil War is coming to a close. Where's Jefferson Davis trying to get to at the end of the war?
In the American Southwest?
Texas.
Yeah.
Texas, yeah.
Texas.
It's close to the border.
Well, no, it's not just that. As I put in the first book, the Trans-Mississippi Department of the Confederacy was fully functioning and very healthy. And it had an international border with Mexico. And that's where most of the gun running and everything else, that's where most of the trade with the Confederacy was actually flowing. So in other words, Davis, forget about this junior high school picture that we have that Davis, I mean, come on, study the man's history. Jefferson Davis is about the last person that is a rabid fanatic. Okay. It's not a picture that fits him at all. What he's doing, if you read his own memoirs, is he's trying to get the whole Confederate government, archives and all, please note the archives part, transferred from Richmond to the Trans-Mississippi Department. That's what he's doing. So, in other words, he wants to go there and continue as a rump Confederacy. And by the way, Generals Grant and Sherman are worried that he might actually be able to do it. So, in other words, forget what you've been taught. The principal generals of the Union military are concerned about that idea. So
yeah,
on and on it goes.
Yeah, something else was interesting too. There was a little quote in your book, and it said, a few days before Abraham Lincoln's assassination, all of the money that the Confederacy had in Montreal left for Europe.
Fancy that.
I mean, what are the implications of that? I mean, especially if the Confederate money is gone, and then in Reconstruction they say, well, the greenback is going to be tied to the same thing that the Confederate notes are. I mean, what is this all about?
I actually think that what it's about is implied in the Resumption Act. There is a famous quotation that I deal with in both books it's an apocryphal quotation by Chancellor von Bismarck, who is usually cited in this regard as saying, well, the high financial powers determined on the death of Lincoln to prevent the furtherance of Lincoln's monetary and fiscal policy, namely the greenback. Okay. Now that quotation gets circulated a lot in alternative research circles. The problem is it's entirely apocryphal. It does not appear until the 1920s in an obscure work by a Frenchman, of all people. And there is no provenance or no evidentiary support for the quotation. So the question is, did Chancellor von Bismarck say anything like that? And if so, to whom would he have said it? This is Bismarck we're talking about. So he's not going to come out and blurt it out for the Berliner Tageblatt, and have it published and run on the Sunday edition. No. So whoever he's saying this to is also important. We don't know. However, there is a contextual clue that indicates that maybe, just maybe, there's a teensy tiny amount of truth to Bismarck watching the financial developments of the American Civil War. And guess what it is? It's Ulysses S. Grant. Why is it Ulysses S. Grant? Well, because when Grant is in office running probably the most corrupt administration since bottomless Joe Biden and terrible Trump. I mean, it was a corrupt administration. At the end of his second term in office, what does Grant do? Well, he goes on a world tour. He circumnavigates the world. And while he's in Berlin, he stops off to have tea and cigars with Otto von Bismarck. Now, I have a bit of a problem here thinking that Ulysses S. Grant and Otto von Bismarck are going to be sharing pictures of their grandchildren and telling stories about their wonderful families to each other. I just have a teensy tiny problem with that idea. There is some purpose of state involved in that meeting. And if there's any meeting in which Bismarck may have said something like that to someone who would have known about the financial arrangements of both the Union and the Confederacy, that would have been the opportunity to do it. So this is an entirely circumstantial, contextual argument I'm making, that don't be too quick to dismiss that apocryphal quotation of Chancellor von Bismarck. To me, it fits with the rest of the story that emerges during the Civil War. And it certainly fits the wider context that the European powers are watching developments in North America very closely, and two of them, obviously, France and Britain, wavering very close to actual outright intervention in the war. And by the way, it was Russia that pulled the Union's fat out of the fire on that one. So yeah, Russia.
Yeah, of
go
all places,
figure.
right?
Of all places, yeah, right.
So, Joseph, so I know if I'm following kind of the breadcrumbs that you're leaving here, and just maybe,
Yeah, this is the Cliff Notes version. It's not anywhere nearly as thorough or as convincing as the book. That's the
sure,
problem.
absolutely. And so, but I want to try to see if I'm connecting things. Having not read the second book yet, let's see if I got this. What I think you might be alluding to here, and if I'm putting words into your mouth or into the book, please let me know. And Michaels, you can tell me if I got the conclusion kind of correct on some of this. So first, when you talk about John Wilkes Booth meeting with the DuPonts and all these other individuals, I start thinking about the terms of what does it look like of government banking and world banking, centralized power. When I hear about Britain being involved in some of this, and maybe a British intelligence agency watching what's happening, I start to go, everything that you're describing is, okay, after the Civil War and during the Civil War, the Union needs massive funding, right? And if I remember correctly, the gold wasn't enough.
Right.
So what do? They get these notes, these greenbacks,
right,
which is basically the fiat system that we have now. It's basically like toilet paper that they're giving worth to intrinsically and bypassing banks. And this is, in my take, the beginning of the Federal Reserve. This is a blueprint in order to show what could be done by taking away the gold standard and moving everybody to a fiat currency. And now, instead of me going, oh, gee, what happened in the early 1900s? I'm going, wait a minute. Farrell has just painted an entire picture that this operation started 50 years earlier, and it started with the Civil War. And I never realized that. I've read The Creature on Jekyll Island before. I never put these things together.
No, they definitely go together.
But you are painting a very good picture that the Federal Reserve Act in 1913 actually started with the National Bank Act, probably back in 1864, the time period that you're talking about, and all these people are in the room together.
Right. The reason for the deflationary policy is to to put that lien on American labor. Let's look at the thesis. The European powers, France and England chiefly, were unsuccessful in splitting the Union. That was their geopolitical objective. They're looking at this colossus over there beginning to emerge, and the only way that they can really stop it is to break it up. Okay? By the way, what's going on right now? Did you catch the recent news about Oregon and the United Kingdom signing a memorandum of understanding?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in other words, they've got to split this thing up. Failing that, then the other thing they've got to do is they've got to keep that economy from making full progress after the war is over. How do they do that? Well, they impoverish the South. They deflate the currency, which basically puts a lien on average laborers, particularly farmers who have to borrow the money from the banks to buy the seeds to plant their crops and then repay the loan with a currency whose value has increased in the meantime, and they have to pay the principal back at par value. Okay, that's typical bankster scam.
Right.
And this is why you have Jennings Bryan and his cross of gold speech, and on we could go. And the remonetization of silver. Think the Wizard of Oz, the silver slippers in the actual book, and the yellow brick road. Okay, so in other words, it's a big financial political allegory. Yeah. And I get into that in the first book. So, in other words, you're looking at an effort to keep the country down as much as possible. Now, regarding your thesis that maybe they're learning another lesson from the Civil War, the banksters of Europe. Well, here's a clue and a half for you, Greg.
Okay.
J. Cook is the financier of that time. Okay, J. Cook of Philadelphia. And by the way, he's a railroad man like Lincoln. J. Cook is part of this Confederate Union crowd that is concentrating itself in Montreal all at the same time in 1864 and doing black off-the-books trade in cotton. By the way, sanctioned by both Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis. Okay.
Wait. The cotton bonds were from both of them?
No, the cotton bonds, the airline. No, this is
okay,
black market. This is black market cotton trade. This is something else.
Got it. Okay.
They're all there in Montreal. Why cotton? Well, the Union needs cotton for its uniforms for its big armies, and it doesn't have any cotton. Okay, the Confederacy has the cotton. Okay, and the Confederacy needs money to buy the weapons to fight the Union. So, okay, guys, can we make a deal? This is Donald Trump. All of these people, including J. Cook, are concentrated in Montreal during this time period. So, in other words, what I'm suggesting to you, Greg, is that Cook is there because the Greenback scheme, he was selling bonds to the Union until Lincoln came up with the Greenback idea. So he's no longer making money from the war. And by the way, he can meet a lot of people with British financial connections in Montreal. So I suspect that you're onto a profound thesis here that they're looking at all this. They're trying to put into place this monometallic thing based on the French franc. But probably you have some thinking, oh, wait a minute. Maybe we could do an end run around this whole thing and adopt this system for ourselves. Now, the only problem I see with that thesis, I think it's eminently plausible and reasonable that they would do that. We're lacking the documentary evidence. There are, however, clues, but I'll leave those to people to read in the books.
Okay.
Yeah. Why not go all the way and demonetize all bullion? And here comes the modern word. Please note, we're watching a replay of all of this right now.
Yep.
Why not just call it tokenized assets? You know what this is? This is an Oklahoma goldback. And right at the bottom, if you want to know what the scam is, right at the bottom of this flimsy piece of plastic it says 1/2000th of a troy ounce of 24 karat gold.
Sounds like cryptocurrency.
Ding, ding, ding. We'll give you a little fleck of gold smashed into micropixels thinness on a piece of plastic, and you give us your hard assets. This is a tokenized asset. This is the money of the Soviet Union, where everybody owned the property. All the people owned the property of the Soviet Union. And you had a little decimal place of it. That's what this is.
And it also explains why we see all of these states starting up their own bullion reserves.
Ding, ding, ding. And what are they doing it in connection? I was all on board the bullion reserves until they started saying, we're going to tie this to an electronic clearing system.
Right.
Why? Because the electronic clearing system gives them the ability mathematically to calculate the decimal. They don't have to revalue the money. They can claim that they are backing it with gold. Unfortunately, it's such a minute amount of gold, it's no backing at all.
It also goes to show you how, quote unquote, worthless the American worker is.
Yeah.
And why they're pushing AI and robots.
Yeah.
And basically, they are pushing this whole Green New Deal agenda with electric vehicles and all this other stuff and water rationing because they didn't choose humans over AI.
Well,
they need all the data centers.
Remember what my friend Catherine Fitz has been saying for years. They're doing all of that, and they're going to make it so that whatever labor AI performs is taxable.
Right. Which also implies AI rights.
Ding, ding, ding.
So wait, but before we leave the Rialto, I just want to ask you one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the United States is constantly being goaded into various wars on behalf of other foreign powers, particularly
Yes.
always using the treasury of virtue?
Yes. Yeah, I do. Now, for people who don't know the reference to the treasury of virtue, at the end of the Rialto and Richmond, the last chapter of that is devoted to a couple of essays by the American Southern man of letters, Robert Penn Warren. And Warren wrote a little book called, a wonderful essay called The Legacy of the Civil War. And I wish people would read it. Because, here's a Southerner trying to talk openly and honestly about what the legacies were for both the Union and the Confederacy after the war. And he points out that what the war did for the Union is it created American culture, the American culture of self-righteous virtue. So in other words, take all that New England Yankee secularized Calvinism that percolates and bubbles and poisons, much of the abolitionist thinking of the North at the time, and wed that to the idea that the nation itself is inherently virtuous and therefore everybody else must be like us. That's your treasury of merit. And by the way, it's a Roman Catholic doctrine that the infinite sacrifice of Christ has a super added surplus of merits brought into the treasury of merits by the saints that the Pope can dispense as releases from punishments in purgatory. So in other words, this is the whole system of indulgences and so on and so forth. So what Penn Warren is simply doing is he's saying what America did was it took all of that ecclesiastical infrastructure, if you will, and applied it as a national culture. So that, our wars must be always fought for ending slavery or establishing democracy or overthrowing tyranny. In other words, there's always a moral goal in mind, notwithstanding the fact that maybe people don't want to have our morality. So in other words, this is a profound shift in American culture that occurs because of the war. And again, I like to use the example of Jefferson Davis himself, the president of the Confederacy, because Davis was one of those Southerners. They were few and far between, but they were also, in many cases, very highly placed in the political aristocracy of the South. Well, Davis was one of the people that advocated what he called the high road to emancipation. He was advocating that if we are going to emancipate the slaves, what we must do is bring them up so that they are able to be participating, contributing, productive members of society, and they have to be given an economic stake in it. So at his plantation, if you ever read about Jefferson Davis and the way he ran his plantation, he had the slaves running everything. He taught them to read, to write, to administer the finances, to dispense the financial allowances to the slaves, on at certain regular periods. And he also had them trying any criminals or mischief or anything like that happened in the slave population, and he absolutely forbade them to use whipping or any other form of cruel and unusual punishment. So in other words, this is a guy that put his money where his mouth was. And say what you will about Jefferson Davis, he was at least principled in this respect. So the problem with many of these Southerners after the war with Reconstruction is, if you talk to some of them, I've met some of these old Southern families, and I can tell you that Reconstruction is still remembered by them as a complete and utter disaster. And one of the first things that one of these families told me when I first met them years ago after college was that one of the effects of Reconstruction was to exacerbate racial tensions in the South between blacks and whites. Just took it right off the charts. And when I listened to what they were trying to say and telling me why, that there was this movement in the South that we're going to have to get rid of this institution, but we've got to do it in a way that is not going to create economic chaos. Lincoln himself comes to this position in 1862 when he proposes an economic stake and a financial component to manumission. So in other words, the pre-war abolitionist John Brown radical is not what Lincoln had in mind, but unfortunately what obtains in the policies of Reconstruction after his assassination is largely that. It's this, put the boot on the neck of the Southerner, black or white, and there we go. So anyway, I definitely think there's foreign influence, because when you look at this period after the war, you see very clearly that influence at work. When you look at the influence during the war, France and Britain ready to intervene, Spain giving the Confederacy recognized belligerent status, Prussia and Austria just kind of saying, it doesn't really concern us geopolitically, and Russia, Tsar Alexander II, sending the Russian fleet into San Francisco and New York as a little message. And he's interviewed after the war by the Union press. And the Tsar actually says that he was asked by Britain and France to have Russia intervene. And he told them, and you can read the interview in the Rialto Reconstruction, Alexander II says, and I told them under no circumstances would Russia approve any sort of intervention by those powers in the Civil War. And to drive home that point, that's why he says, I sent the fleet into the Union ports as a demonstration of support for Mr. Lincoln. And why did I do that? Well, it wasn't because I had any particular love for Mr. Lincoln. It's because I did not want to see Britain end up with a monopoly of heavy industrial technology after the war. And by the way, what else did Alexander II do?
Go ahead.
He emancipated the Russian serfs.
I was just going to say that. It seemed as though the Russian version of Reconstruction would have been a lot better for the South than anything.
Listen, the Russians, this is happening all more or less at the same time. Well, the Russian version, the Russians were very much like what Lincoln proposed to the Congress in 1862. The Russian version was, okay, we're going to give low interest government loans We're going to float bonds to raise the capital. We're going to give low interest government loans to the emancipated serfs to buy their land from their masters, their nobility. The nobility get compensated for the loss of their land, and there will be a government subsidy for a period of time to compensate them for the loss of their labor. So everybody has an economic stake in the plan. The czar didn't just say, okay, you're free now, go to it. Like that would have done anything in Russian society at that time. The plan worked because what happened? The Ukraine becomes what? In that 40 years from the Russian emancipation up to the outbreak of World War I, what does the Ukraine become? What is it known as? It's known as the breadbasket of Europe. Russian agriculture absolutely booms. The Russian industrialization kicks off in the 19th century as a result of the emancipation. So in other words, this was a calculated domestic policy on the part of the autocracy in Russia. And this is the reason that they are getting heavily involved in the geopolitics behind the scenes of the American Civil War. And again, like he says, I have no particular love for the American Republic. I'm interested in stopping that little, outfit island country from gaining a monopoly on all this technology. That's what he's doing. It's very interesting. So yeah, is there foreign influence? You betcha, Greg. It's right up. I personally, I'm surprised that the Civil War did not become the First World War. I'm very surprised.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Especially with some of the stuff that was floating in the background to unite both sides again with the invasion of Canada and Mexico. We have to go fight the barbarians just beyond the horizon.
Yeah, well, this is an aspect that you may encounter just as kind of a brief passing comment in the way the Civil War is presented in history books. But I'm telling you, the secret meeting that Abraham Lincoln had at the end of the war with the Confederate vice president and a Confederate senator, and what they're discussing is Francis Preston Blair's scheme to end the war by starting another war and having the Union kick the Brits out of Canada, and let's remember that cell in Montreal, and have the Confederacy kick the French out of Mexico. And by the way, Blair proposed a detailed plan for how Robert E. Lee was to detach the Army of Northern Virginia after the Confederate government starts its continuity of government operation, and Lee was to join up with General Johnston, and those two armies make or fight their way over to the Trans-Mississippi. So in other words, Jefferson Davis at the end of the war is acting on that plan. The only thing that prevents it is when the Union intercepts Lee's instructions to the Army of Virginia on how to withdraw and the lines of march that they are to do it. And that's why Grant is able to catch him and finally force his surrender at Appomattox. So in other words, that little peace conference at Hampton Roads is crucial. And by the way, when Lincoln returns to Washington and the scuttlebutt, the gossip has already hit the streets. You were where? Talking to who? That's the reaction of Thaddeus Stevens, the radical Republican abolitionist from Pennsylvania in the House of Representatives. It's also the reaction of Senator Benjamin Wade in Ohio in the Senate, and they launch a movement to impeach Lincoln. For what? Treason. So yeah, that peace conference is very crucial. Very crucial.
Sounds very familiar with modern times. They're using
Doesn't
the same games.
Yeah, that's why I'm writing the book.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, if you were to think about how modern intelligence agencies or even special interest groups, people that are billionaires, how do they compare historically in terms of influence over domestic political figures, do you think? Like when you look back at this time frame of the Civil War, and then you look at modern day, what's happening with influence over elections, over policy, where do you see parallels? Like what are some of the main things that stand out?
I see them all over the place. Pardon me. I see them all over the place, principally because you're dealing with a class of people that treasures moving in the shadows and behind the scenes and being the power brokers. So they always have to act through an avatar. They have to act through a proxy. The problem, let's use the business model. The problem is you can send out all of your proxy votes for the stockholders meeting, and you may think you've got all the votes lined up, and maybe someone else is out there organizing or gets a burr in the bonnet and decides, no, I don't want to vote for that. Maybe you put someone into power and you think they're going to go along with your plan. Think Abraham Lincoln and the radical abolitionists here for a moment. Now, Lincoln was an abolitionist, but he was not a John Brown abolitionist. And in his own words, if keeping slavery would have preserved the Union, I would have kept it. So in other words, this is a realpolitik guy here. He's a railroad lawyer.
Yeah. Okay? What's gonna benefit me the most?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you may think that you're going to control this guy once you get him into office, but not really. Not really. So this is the problem they always have. They can put what they think is their own man, and the guy that once he gets the actual power might decide, hey, I don't have to listen to you people anymore. Think Hitler, So yeah, or think Stalin.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
The reason I'm asking is since we spoke in July, a lot has happened in this country. A big event happened that I would love to pick your brain about.
Okay.
Just in the terms of I just don't feel like we have the full story. And I'm not asking you to put on, any type of explanations. I'm just looking at the fact that, here we are, a bunch of people getting together to figure out what the path forward will be out of the Civil War. Mm-hmm. And in September, there was a major assassination that the world all saw with Charlie Kirk.
Yes.
I actually envy you, Dr. Farrell, because I know you're not as plugged into social media as Michael's and myself. So I'm hopeful that you were able to spare your soul the violence of what that looked like for millions of people who witnessed it online.
Yeah.
We've heard really nothing from our government when it comes to Thomas Crook's attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. We've heard really nothing when it comes to this guy's assassination of Charlie Kirk. We get this immediate, right afterwards, immediate narrative that all of a sudden, oh, well, he went into the woods, reassembled the gun after he had took it apart, hit it by a tree, texted his boyfriend, hey, by the way, I just did this really horrible thing, and this is what I would have done had I not. It almost looked like the government itself was writing the text messages for the gentleman, not saying that's what happened, just saying that's what it looks like. And listening to everything that you just laid out from 1864, I'm going, how do I know that I'm not seeing the exact same thing playing out in 2025?
You are. It's a narrative. I have not seen the video. I've deliberately avoided watching that video.
Please continue to do so. Sincerely, there's no need that anybody
can't do it. But from what I have heard, I've been following a number of people that have been trying to dig into Mr. Kirk's murder. Candace Owens, chief among them. And at this point, having reviewed the evidence that she and some others have presented, Max Blumenthal being another, some of these people, I am convinced that the official narrative is just another Warren report. That For one thing, assembling and disassembling a rifle on the run,
Yep.
firing that caliber of a bullet and getting the damage result that they're alleging. No. I actually prefer of all the hypotheses currently being floated, I prefer the exploding microphone hypothesis the most.
Yep.
And the reason why is that would be just the kind of oily thing that a certain little pipsqueak country in the Middle East, whom I think we would be much better off just severing ties altogether with. I think we were treated to a case of the revelation of the method when Prime Minister Nutty Yehu, as I like to call him, came out and said, we didn't do it. I think him
Without no one asking. Exactly.
Without no one asking. That was revelation of the method, if you know what that technique is. And it was very clever revelation of the method because it was reverse. He knows that he's going to be taken to task for it, and he's literally thumbing his nose at everybody when he says that. You can't prove it, and even so, we got away with it. It's loathsome and reprehensible and evil.
And you also referenced in one of your posts about the munitions plant explosions,
yes,
and how they could have been tied to all of this too.
Oh, I think absolutely, yeah. There are munitions plant. There was a munitions plant explosion in Tennessee that occurred within a frame of time shortly after. And then the thing that tells me that this was a geopolitical operation to assassinate Mr. Kirk in front of his followers and the world, and record it. It was another John F. Kennedy type of event.
Oh, absolutely it was.
It was staged to be deliberate and out in front of everybody, and we're in charge and there's nothing you people can do to stop us. The other big event that I think puts the cherry on this geopolitical sundae is all of a sudden, as a result of that assassination, all of a sudden the whole MAGA coalition has splintered. And you have major figures like Tucker Carlson and so on coming out and just saying, enough of this Zio-Christianity. Enough, no more. Now, I'm not an evangelical, and I have never been and never will be a dispensationalist. I'm an Orthodox Catholic Christian, and that whole theological system is just about as far from the teaching of the Church Fathers as you can possibly get. Yep. There's no other way to put it, folks. But when Trump came out as this coalition that he put together is beginning to shred over the issue of sending all of this money to Israel when we're supposed to be about America first, what does Trump do? All of a sudden, he develops a concern for the persecution of Christians in Nigeria. And to me, that smacks of trying to do damage repair after the fact by demonstrating, suddenly we're concerned about the Christian population. Well, what about the Christian population of Palestine? Many of those people are Christian. They're not necessarily Muslim just because they're Arab. This is another thing Americans have got to get over, is Arab equals Muslim.
Limited worldview. Yep.
Yeah, it's just nuts. If you know anything about the history of the church in that area. So it's one of the most famous church fathers, St. John of Damascus, is Arab. Come on. So anyway, I question this whole incident. There is an aspect to it that reeks of geopolitics, and for right now, I'm entertaining the hypothesis that somehow Israel was behind it, along with all these Zio Christians, or whatever you want to call them, that populate American Christianity. I think the thing that is really upsetting people about Candace Jones is she's latched onto that.
Right. Candace
and
Jones
I don't think she's gonna let it go. She's smelling it. Now, I wish she would, contact me. I could tell her, look here, look there, because I can tell you that the web developer of my website, when he was a student of mine, this is 30, 40 years ago, we came to a similar conclusion about these mega churches, that they were nothing but big money laundering operations. So, there is something going on, and I suspect that as this story unfolds, you're going to see a change in popular attitudes towards Israel. You're already seeing that. I think you're also going to see a huge splintering of American evangelicalism.
Well, I think we're already seeing that. And that's kind of what I wanted to ask you about in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk. They did this evangelical, it wasn't a funeral. It was I wouldn't even call it a celebration of life. It was very odd to me. They brought out Robert F. Kennedy Jr. They brought out Trump.
Oh, yeah.
They brought out J.D. Vance, right? Erica Kirk is there speaking. And I'm thinking this is like a rally for evangelicals.
Yep.
And it felt, as a Catholic, it felt weird to me.
Absolutely.
Erica Kirk walks out, and what do we see? We see fireworks going off. Your husband just died.
And
someone in the arena is like, what's going to make this a moment? Fireworks. That's what Charlie would want. We want fireworks.
Fireworks.
Here. Yeah. And I'm sitting there going, I don't know if this is what Charlie Kirk would really want.
No. The man was
death.
examining Catholicism
Correct.
At the time of his death. So you're gonna celebrate his death with a fireworks display?
Yeah, it was bizarre.
The idea of a funeral is you grieve.
So with that in mind, and thinking about like the way that that unfolded over that week, what has happened since then is the label culture of 2020 is back. Mm-hmm. If you dare say anything to defend Charlie Kirk, certain parts of people will say, oh, well, he was a racist, he was a bigot, he was this. Despite to the contrary, you can't find any content that would support that. If you suggest that, hey, you know what? Maybe Israel was involved because we have these text messages. We know that he wasn't going with the narrative. You immediately become anti-Semitic. Yeah. If you start saying anything that is counter to another side, the label culture is back to destroy you. That always tells me that you're probably likely on to something. If the best that they can do is say, hey, here's some labels to throw back at you, you're probably already winning the arguments.
They're not only on to something. The vehemence with which the response to those types of things is being touted now. I mean, for crying out loud, they had fine at this Trump. Tucker is not MAGA, that whole staged awful conference. I think they know that they are in deep trouble, because let's look at what has happened to the terms racism and anti-Semitism. They have been so overused, they have lost all currency. They're essentially now perceived by most people as meaningless attacks. And for many people, just as you have said, people look at those terms now as a waving the flag. Look here. So in other words, the more they protest, the more people are looking at those people saying things like Candace Jones or saying things like Tucker Carlson. Oh, he interviewed Nick Fuentes. How dare he? So, let's cancel him. So what has happened? Fuentes has absolutely skyrocketed in the amount of people viewing his channel. And what's happening to poor Ben Shapiro, who wants to scream and lecture Megyn Kelly? His viewership is tanking. And I say good riddance to you and Mark Levin and that whole nasal screaming lobby that you have. Good riddance. Mm-hmm. Good riddance.
I like nasal screaming.
Well, I mean, come on, Chris. Listen to Levin.
Oh,
he talks like this all the time, and then his voice gets higher and higher and higher.
Oh, God! What a
Sieg Heil! It's like watching Hitler.
He should just open his show up with Erica, and just end it. Just take off the veil. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
It is. I totally agree. Dude, you're not doing your cause any help here.
Truly, I think they're going to use this whole anti-Semitism nonsense as a way to eviscerate the Constitution.
Oh, absolutely.
And two most recent stories that have been brought up. This guy Portnoy from Barstool,
Dave Portnoy, yeah.
whatever it is.
Great pizza reviews.
Yeah. Somebody what said F you to him, F you Jew, and threw some change at him. And now that person is arrested. He's going on all of the talk shows about, we need to stop anti-Semitism. And then you had the billionaire Lauder come out this weekend and say, anti-Semitism is off the charts. We need to start tackling it in the schools. I mean, are they just using the anti-Semitism rhetoric as a way to finally put a nail in the coffin of the Constitution?
Yes, I totally think that they are. And one of the reasons I think that they are is at the time of the recognition of the State of Israel by Truman, let's please note that, you had many Jewish scholars in this country, Hannah Arendt, Albert Einstein, Alfred Lilienthal, saying that this was an absolute mistake for precisely the reasons that you're alleging here. And that eventually what it was going to do, it was going to create a privileged class, and that the creation of that privileged class would eventually backlash on them. Now, we know that it's a privileged class. Why? How many people, here's a question that I want every talk show host out there to start asking of every candidate for political office that shares that faith. And I'm very serious here. Do you hold or will you accept dual citizenship in the State of Israel?
Thank you.
Because you cannot serve two masters. Someone wise once said that who ran afoul of the Jewish authorities, who was, by the way, a Jew. So I think, and I'm echoing Catherine Fitz here, who's been saying the same thing for years. We must eliminate dual citizenship. There is no place in this country for someone holding political office who has citizenship in another country. Because that's where your allegiance lies. And I'm totally with Candace Owens here when she says, really, if you listen to Mr. Shapiro, it's Israel first for him. That's his country.
I'll do one better. No dual citizenship for spouses either.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I'll tell Joseph, we had a friend of mine called me up about 3 months ago. Yeah, about 3 months ago. He said, hey, I just thought you'd find it interesting, a conversation I overheard at breakfast this morning. And I said, well, where were you in breakfast? He's like, oh, I was at blah, 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 Newcastle, which is right up the road from me. And I said, well, who was talking? He said, well, it was one of our state representatives. And I said, oh, tell me more. Like, what was it? And he said, well, he was telling me he had to go to New York City and spend the night for about 3 nights to get in on this trip over to Israel. And I said, wait a minute. A local state rep representing the local government in a small little district is going to go over to Israel for what? And then, it was probably about a month ago, the financials came out, and there was this huge event where state representatives in Congress, state senators and Congress, people from different states, all went to Israel for this event last month. And it was from the entire United States, hundreds of people. And I'm going, wait a minute. Like, I don't want to go down some of the Nick Fuentes rabbit hole type of stuff. That's not who I am, right? I don't blame an entire subsection of people for the world's wrongs. I don't think that's right. I denounce that completely. But when I see an organization of leaders, much like we just talked about at the top of the show, you see that happening, and they're bringing in people that should have no staked interest in the doings of Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Ohio, Oregon, Wyoming. What the hell are they doing there? And how can I not be a little bit more skeptical of this small states influencing our entire country at the present moment? And it's led me down this spot. And you and I were talking about this before in the green room. I am now really, really disappointed with President Trump.
Same here.
I feel like this America First was anything but America First.
Yep.
It's America. Oh, and don't forget our little friends over here and the special interest group over here, these tech billionaires over here, and anybody else that can help enrich my family to make sure that Barron Trump never has to work a day in his life after I'm dead and gone.
Yep.
I am done with Donald Trump in apologizing in any way, shape, or form. I don't regret my vote because I think Kamala Harris would have been an absolute
Even
nightmare.
worse, much
Absolutely.
worse.
It would have been a lot worse where we are. But I am so disheartened and disillusioned that I don't even think I could vote in another election. I don't know.
I'm right there with you. You know,
I'm done.
I told people when I came out, I had quit voting in 1988 when King George I ran for president after Reagan.
King George the First.
And well, I hate the Bush fam. I hate the Bush family. I cannot stand them.
Dick Cheney, you know,
and him too. But I quit voting because at that point it was just, Tweedledum and Tweedledee. And for all the rhetoric that Republicans have been spouting over the decades up to that point, nothing ever got done. Eisenhower basically euchred Senator Taft out of the Republican nomination in 1952, and Taft would have rolled back the New Deal. Eisenhower didn't. He said, okay, it's there, so we got to accept it, And I think truly that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in addition to being one of the most vile people, was one of the worst presidents we've ever had, right down there with Herbert Hoover. But anyway, I quit voting. But when Hillary was running in 2016, I had to come out of retirement because she is truly rotten and vile and evil. And the reason I did that is I had friends that actually worked for her at Rose Law Firm. So, I had the inside scuttlebutt on Bill and Hillary. So that's why I came out of retirement. But I'm right back there with you. I don't see the current Republican leadership. That's what bothers me. Trump cozying up to the likes of Lindsey Graham Cracker, another one of the, pardon the pun, but the guy is repulsive. And to that whole Zio-Christian group, if this is where we're going, I ain't going there, because it's like you say with all these people trotting off to Israel.
Yeah, let me show you that real quick for people that this is the event, because I want you to talk about continue your thought. But 50 states won Israel, September 14th to September 18th. 241 American state legislators went and visited the Western Wall, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Yep.
Yeah, go kiss the ring.
Yeah, go kiss the ring. And as far as visiting the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is concerned, I think that's just thrown in to appease the Christian sentiments of people in this country. If it were up to the Israeli government, all they would do is go kiss the Wailing Wall, and that's it, which nauseates me. Right. What are you doing? This and you have certain states passing these anti-hate speech laws against saying anything critical about Israel. That worries me immensely, because eventually they are going to demand that Christian churches change the text of the New Testament. That's coming. Well, and certain versions of the Bible will be prohibited because that's coming.
Ooh, you just made me think of something, Joseph. My wife is convinced that the currency of the future is in books, because she said that in the future, AI is going to erase parts of the Bible. It's going to erase parts of your favorite books. And if you have the physical copy with the date, it will be invaluable to society. Yes. And so you're actually talking about that with the Bible. Wow.
Listen, Greg, I have been warning my readership for years by saying the only canonical version of any of my works is the hard copy, for precisely that reason. Because I have seen Amazon's Kindle and other ebook platforms completely gut the formatting of my books, such that if you were to try to footnote a piece of my book and say, I got this idea from Farrell on this page, it won't be there in the pagination. And they can literally erase as you've pointed out, erase or change things. So no, the only canonical copy is the hard copy. Period.
And this is one of the reasons why I think they're making a massive push to digitize everything.
Yes, absolutely. It will give them power to erase sections of our history that they don't want.
1984.
That's 1984. That is precisely it. If you think Joseph Stalin standing next to Yagoda on the Moscow River in that famous picture of him, and I think it was Kalinin, and then you see the subsequent picture in the Soviet Encyclopedia where Yagoda has been, not Yagoda, what was his name? Yezhov, where you see Yezhov cut out of the picture after he was purged. You're going to see that kind of adjusting of the record on steroids. And target number 1 is going to be the Bible, and target number 2 is going to be the writings of the church fathers. Absolutely. Absolutely.
It genuinely seems like there is a true war against Christianity.
Absolutely.
I mean, I hate to say it, it sounds so hackneyed because you had people like Rush Limbaugh and all the rest.
The Christmas catchphrase, I know.
Right.
The war on Christmas, it's coming.
But it's absolutely true. I mean, think about all of this that we see, right? You've got people pushing anti-Semitism hate speech laws with the broadest definition possible of what anti-Semitism is to such a point where you can't even reference the New Testament.
Right.
There is a complete loss of morals in the United States right now. Look at the millionaires from OnlyFans just selling feet pictures and videos.
Yes.
There's got to be some new realignment. And it seems as though everyone has to be ashamed if they say that they're a Christian in some denomination or otherwise.
Right.
And it also seems as though that this whole evangelical movement that we have out there is nothing more than a way for not only money laundering, but supporting other pipsqueak nations around the world and justifying their actions, trying to create some kind of loosey-goosey logical argument that there is a Judeo-Christian connection to the United States going back to the 1700s.
Here's a cultural clue that I hope resonates with what you just said and resonates with everybody else. If you look at American churchianity, and I don't even want to call it Christianity, and I probably shouldn't even call it churchianity because nothing they do resembles anything that I would consider churchy. If you look at just the trappings, trappings and symbols tell you a lot about what you're dealing with. I have yet to see them build a cathedral. What they build are auditoriums. And when they build their auditoriums, you might occasionally get a cross. Never a crucifix, of course. You might get some threadbare symbolization of the Christian religion. You will not get an altar at the center of the auditorium. You'll get a pulpit, if that, because what they like to do is they like to pace on the stage as they're yelling at people. So the symbols tell a lot. It's like I used to be a very traditional Anglican, and I'm watching the Church of England self-destruct. They've just allowed graffiti, literal LGBTQ and other persecuted minority people to put graffiti in the Cathedral of Canterbury. Now that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's desecration.
Now,
that's sacrilege. That's
what's interesting about that is that the artist and the art director aren't even Christians.
Probably not.
No, they aren't, because I did a little post on this and I got a lot of flack for saying so, and it's, probably dual citizen stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, we want to be members of your church and not.
So, why is that even allowed? Could you imagine if let's say a Shabbat, a synagogue, allowed Christians to be the art director and to have a Christian artist come in and then graffiti the whole plate? I mean, it's outrageous.
Of course it is. Of course it is. It's sacrilege. We don't take care of our symbols in the West anymore, and particularly in this country, because we rejected tradition in the founding of this country. Pure and simple. That I'm adamant about that. Oh. But the thing that people have to wake up and realize is that the symbolization tells you a lot. Those ugly modern, pardon me here, I call them Vatican II burlap vestments that we see the modernist clergy wear, with the big applique that screams some sort of nonsense cliche generality like love or joy or peace. This whole movement to uglify Christian worship has been very successful, and I think it is quite telling that uglification is, by and large, is what you see in evangelicalism in this country. The whole revivalist mentality that we have to have a rock group in church, because we can't afford a pipe organ, but we can raise lots of money to fund the rock group and the big auditorium. Come on. It's more of this rejection of traditional culture and tradition per se that's at work here.
Yeah, I got very disheartened at one point in youth ministry working in the Catholic Church because there was an event called NCYC, National Catholic Youth Conference.
Yes,
and I was assigned to take a few of my teen leaders and have them announce the talent to go up. And so I was meeting the individuals that are writing the songs that are being played at churches across the United States. And I won't use any names because I'm not looking to create drama from anybody or have people in my inbox. But most of the people I met were God-loving, phenomenal human beings. But there was one artist in particular who had just got done playing for the Pope. And we go up to him and I'm like pretty excited. I like his music. I'm like, this is pretty neat. And he didn't have time for the teenagers, didn't have time for me. I watched his backstage antics. I saw everything going on. Then I saw him get out there, getting everybody singing, let the Holy Spirit's alive in the room. And I'm going, this guy's a charlatan.
Yes.
I can't take him serious. Like, the one guy, I'll tell you, like the most loving person I've met in the Catholic faith of music is Steve Angersano. I think the world of that guy. But this other individual that I met, I'm going, you are the antithesis. You are the person who is cashing in, likely wrote a pop song and put God's name over top. Anytime you want to say love, you just say God and you fill in the blanks. And in many ways, the post-Vatican II, this everybody has to be in touch with our feelings, getting away from the low mass in Catholicism. It's wild to me to see now that the church's teachings, the core teachings, are being dumbed down by a certain subsection of the church in order to go, we got to bring everybody in. No. Everybody was already in. We asked people to live to a standard. We've always said in Catholicism, there's nothing wrong with being gay. We've never in Catholicism said that being gay itself is the sin. We've always talked about that it is actually a disordered event, a male being with a male, a woman being with a woman from a faith perspective, because it's not possible for procreation. And so that was actually the church's teaching. And then the church itself now has kind of gone away from everything and being like, well, that's not the sin part. It's not
what has happened is people, the American civil religion model has become the model that everybody's employing. And in doing so, they are confusing enthusiasm with the promptings of the Holy Spirit. And there is absolutely no equivalence. The revivalist mentality is ultimately antithetical to any form of historical sacramental Christianity, pure and simple. So, there's no reverence. As a result of this, everybody's doing their own thing. I could go on and on. I've spent most of my life in theological circles and observing this decay. And it's going to have to hit rock bottom. My fear is when it hits rock bottom, there's going to not be enough curmudgeons around to show people this is the way it was and this is the way it should be.
I think you're accurate there. You know, I was telling you before the show, I was doing this retreat perspective. It was basically a 90-day Lenten retreat, but it focused in just these guided meditations for St. Michael. Mm-hmm. And these priests that were leading this conversation started talking about the archangels and the traditional description of them. Mm-hmm. And we always, when we think of cherubims, right, we think of, oh, that's the angels. But we don't think about Michael, Gabriel, Raphael in the terminology of they were gigantic and could crush humans. I know that you studied in patristics, and this might be something that you're better than myself able to articulate. Could you tell me a little bit about your understanding of what are angels? And then how did that evolve into the way that we talk about them in modern times? Is that something you ever studied?
Apparently you've not read or heard of my book, The Demon in the Acre.
Yeah, Michael's read that book about, and that's the intelligent plasma, right?
Yes.
I thought that book was monumental.
Yes.
I mean, it's earth-shattering, in my opinion, on what you bring up, especially with the Dacian, right?
Yeah, the cover of that book is a depiction of an angel. And you find various artists that have attempted to depict them on the basis of their actual description in the lore. So we have this idea that a cherub is, you know, this cute little baby with delicate little wings and a petite little smile, and he's kind of fluffy or she's kind of fluffy. And, you know, it's like C.S. Lewis said, our typical Western image, artistic image of an angel is of an entity that is going to say, there, rather than fear not. Yeah. Now, if you encounter one of those things staring at you with the wings from all sorts of angles and gazillions of eyes and so on and so forth, zapping off lots of plasma, you're going to say, it's probably going to say fear not rather than there, because that's something that will terrify you. Interestingly enough, I think those kinds of depictions are probably much more accurate symbols than the 19th century little baby with, you know, the cute little feathered wings and all the nonsense. The Raphael-esque angels. The reason I think that is that in that book, I have an extended quotation from, as a matter of fact, St. John of Damascus in his book on the Orthodox faith, where he's trying to describe angels. And it's a very lengthy passage. But one of the things that he brings out over and over again is that these things, if he were to use modern language, he would say that these things are hyperdimensional beings. In other words, they exist in a space of more than 3 dimensions. And the reason I think that those kinds of depictions of angels are, in fact, you can look at Orthodox icons and you'll see icons occasionally painted with a cherub, and the wings are, you know, there's 6 wings and they're going in all sorts of directions. It's not like anything that would be a bird, you know, that could fly. Well, why is it painted that way? You're attempting to paint a hyperdimensional being on a 2-dimensional surface. But if you were to encounter one, that's the way it would look in 3 dimensions. So in other words, those depictions, I think, are very, very accurate. And encountering something like that, entering into the space that we dwell in, I think, you're going to be terrified because, for one thing, they're going to be gigantic. Up there in the corner of that icon, you'll see those depictions of angels. That's a very typical depiction of angels, and interestingly enough, during in an icon of the Nativity. And yeah, you've got wings going every which direction in that. So yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So yeah, it looks like that's a Russian icon as well. But yeah, you're going to encounter things like that. That the iconography is telling you that this is what they really are. They are not anything like the kind of life that we know. They're very, very different. And that's the reason I think the plasma life hypothesis is so fascinating, because it dovetails very nicely in some respects to some of those traditions you have described in the lore. So I have no difficulty with these kinds of things.
So when people are praying for the intercessions of the angels, do you believe that really what we're looking at? So, okay, let's rewind for people before I put this out there, so that way we kind of have a framework for the conversation. So I think on one show I kind of told you what I teach, but the visible, invisible light spectrum, I think in terms of my eyes can see a frequency, my ears can hear a frequency. I can develop tools for receivers, for radio waves in order to be able to transmit and receive signals. But we have a entire frequency set that we know exists that we cannot receive.
Right.
We don't have the tools in order to dissect exactly what's happening. When we ask for these intercessions, are we, in some respects, maybe playing with a disclosure moment of extraterrestrial frequency that really prayer has always been? I'm just, putting this out there. Prayer has always been a way to connect us to the extraordinary world of communications with archangels and things that we don't quite understand. And then is some of that outside of our abilities as humans? What's your thoughts on that? Because that kind of bizarre.
No, it's not bizarre at all. I think if you're looking for a speculative explanation of that kind of prayer, yeah, I think that's entirely possible, that they might be equipped in some way to receive those types of intercessions. And the reason I think it's possible is that there's a very interesting story that Linda Moulton Howe was told by, I think it was Lynn Buchanan or another one of those very early remote viewers. And what this individual told her was the reason that ETs seem to be so interested in humans, and I find this totally fascinating, is that while ETs are capable of a kind of telepathic communication at very short distances, humans appear to be able to remote view anything, anywhere, at any time over an extreme distance with great accuracy. In other words, it's almost as if they're saying, and I believe this quite frankly myself, it's almost as if they're saying that the consciousness of a human being is a non-local phenomenon. In other words, our personhood is not locked up in the gray matter of our skull. This is a transducer of that, as is all the rest of this. If that's the case, then yes, I would think that if you're dealing with that kind of human anima, that kind of human soul, then by the nature of the case, it's going to be impacting and impacted by similar such entities, such as an angel or a plasma life that is, literally light years, hundreds of thousands of light years across, because that, to hold an organism like that together, you're going to have considerable entanglement and non-locality phenomena doing that. And incidentally, what I find very fascinating is that in some genetic and biological studies, you have biologists now coming right out and saying that what is holding the body, of any organic life together, not just human, my little dog and so on. What's holding all that together is either a quantum entanglement phenomenon or a non-locality phenomenon. Even quantum tunneling has been suggested by some of these people. So in other words, even biological life has some impact on that whole, higher dimensional realm, and vice versa. So I don't think that hypothesis is absurd at all. I think it's one of those speculations that you have to entertain.
Yeah. And then, so earlier last week, we're recording for those that need a timestamp on this, so you have a spot for the conversation. We're recording November 17th, 2025. Last week, there was a sunspot that fired off a 2X1s and then an X5, and we saw auroras dancing across the sky through most of the United States down to Florida, which somebody who studies space weather for the last 2 decades, I'm getting more and more concerned seeing the fact that these coronal mass ejections are causing more of this to be seen at further southern latitudes on a regular basis, with less energy being emitted by the sun. And I know we're at solar maximum. I understand the whole solar cycle. For those that are watching that want to try to explain it to me, I'm well up to date. Over the last 150 years, Earth's magnetic field, by scientific studies, has fallen 30%. 9% of that loss is within the last 20 years. So we're seeing acceleration of it coming down. Somebody said, I'm waiting for the solar shot now to send us back to the Stone Age, to get rid of the internet, to get rid of all this. And I can't help but tie Demon of the Ether and the conversation of archangels and plasma that's intelligent hitting Earth, and just say, in a Joseph Farrell world, if you're thinking about, a book that could say, hey, plasma's intelligent, what's the odds that the sun's actually very aware of what's going on the Earth right now? And this is all part of a design that likely is going to happen over and over again to put us back in our place.
Well, the sun is a plasma. And it's part of Egyptian religion that stars are alive and that they're portals. Okay. Now I'm one of these odd people who's never been a Cartesian, modern Western machine universe guy. Okay. I'm a very, very old traditionalist in the sense that I think of the universe, when I think of it analogically, I think of it much more as an organism than a machine. That idea of the universe is actually relatively new. The organism idea is much older, and by the way, much more nuanced than simply saying or believing, then you're just a pantheist. No, I don't have to be a pantheist because I believe my dog has a soul. Okay. Come on, that doesn't make me a pantheist. So I don't have any problem with these kinds of analogies. What's interesting to me is not so much the sun and whether it may or may not be alive and may or may not be aware of what's going on over here. I can live with either hypothesis perfectly well. Thank you very much. What bothers me in what you said was that the magnetic field of the Earth has declined about 9% over the past 20 years. What happened about 20 years ago?
Okay, a lot has happened in 20 years, but are you talking about space weather, or what am I looking for?
I'm talking about the magnetic field. Why about 20 years did it decline another 9%?
So I don't know the exact reason. I have theories behind it that I could share with you.
Oh, be my guest.
Okay. One of the theories that I've often thought about is, what have we started doing here on Earth with our own signals? and that relates to using lasers. It uses satellites and communicating back and forth and disrupting our magnetic field with the technology that we've been launching into space repeatedly, as well as
analog.
Yep, removing analog and going all digital. That's correct, Chris. Moving to a 5G world.
Okay, stop.
Yeah, all that.
Okay. The conceptual hypothesis I can agree with, but I'm gonna twist it,
Okay.
because there's one thing that could possibly have that kind of effect, much more than 5G and lasers and all the signaling that we've done. Guess what it is? When was the Large Hadron Collider turned on?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
About 20 years ago.
you're right.
Now, what's the strength of the magnetic fields of those detectors in the Large Hadron Collider?
Yeah, I've actually looked that up before. Oh, wow.
16 Teslas.
Yes.
Multiples above the magnetic field strength of the Earth.
Yeah, so
locally.
just for a reference for listeners and viewers, we look at the nanoteslas of our BZ, our magnetic field, and during a positive BZ reading, we are protected from CMEs.
Right.
It's kind of like north facing, so to speak. It's
Right.
fortified.
Right.
When we see negative, it goes below. But
Right.
to Farrell's point here. It is normally like 6 nanoteslas, negative 6 nanoteslas. We just saw negative 60 at one point last week, but that is such a rare excursion. So I never thought about this. Is absolutely brilliant, Joseph.
CERN.
Yeah.
CERN's I've said this on many shows, on many occasions. I said it in my book, The Third Way. If you are dealing with detectors of particles whose magnetic field strength is multiples stronger than the magnetic field strength of the planet, this is going to have, I don't care what expert you consult from CERN or what they've said, this is going to have a magnetic resonance effect when that damn thing is running on the entire planet. Now, because our magnetic field, our planetary magnetic field, is coupled with the magnetic field of the sun, that means that any resonance effect induced here is going to have an effect there.
Yep.
So, in other words, what I am telling everybody is on the Kardashev scale and the Farrell corollaries thereof, we are doing not only planetary-sized engineering, we are doing stellar-sized engineering. And that one whole aspect of the CERN project has nothing whatsoever to do with particle science and everything to do with geophysics and stellar science. So in other words, the particle physics is the public explanation. The secret stuff is concerning geophysics and stellar physics. That's what I'm maintaining. Call me kooky.
No, you just gave me, like, I just had an earth-shattering moment of science. Okay, so, Michaels, we measure nanoteslas for the Earth's magnetic field.
Okay.
I just fact-checked Joseph just now because I wanted to make sure that we weren't talking about nanoteslas because he said Teslas. Teslas, by the way, are much more powerful than nanoteslas. And holy crap, we're operating, the LHC magnets are 100,000 times stronger than the Earth's magnetic field.
Yeah.
And now the couple would.
And by the way, it's embedded in piezoelectric rock.
Yes. And
Right.
by the way, if you look at where the power outages were in Europe, it followed the Large Hadron Collider when it knocked out, what was it, Portugal and parts of Spain for an extended period of time, like a week. Oh, wow.
Now, since we're on having Hadron Collider fantasias here, let's
Yes.
go a little further. I've been maintaining for years that the reason they turned it off right after they turned it on, when they said, oops, we had a magnet coolant leak that caused the thing to rupture, and we had to shut it down. I've seen pictures of the rupture. Have you seen those?
No.
Okay. Well, we know the Hadron Collider is this big circular particle accelerator where they spin a proton stream in opposite directions and then eventually smash them into each other. Okay. The picture shows one part of the ring of the accelerator has been offset upward, just like this, upward, with the pipes storing the coolant all kind of twisted. So in other words, yeah, there you go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There you go. Now, as you look at that, I'm thinking, no, this isn't particle physics. That's torsion. And what's torsion? Torsion is what you get when you twist a soda can that's empty. Okay? It's directly related to gravity. And it can only be expressed in higher dimensional mathematics, in the tensor calculus. So in other words, I've been maintaining all along that the very design of the Hadron Collider, let my glass be the big ring. The circle of my glass is the big ring. And then there's a smaller circular accelerator above the large one that sets on the edge. So in other words, the axes of rotation of the two circular accelerators is not the same. And it's that small circular accelerator that actually does the final injection of the proton stream into the large accelerator. Follow me?
Yes.
Now, what this means is that in my thinking, that canted smaller accelerator is going to introduce a precessional wobble in the whole apparatus. And because of that precessional wobble, you're going to get massive torsion effects, especially in magnetic fields that strong. So remember my friend Dr. Ronald Richter, the Nazi down in Argentina running fusion projects for Juan Perón. What did Dr. Richter say when he was interviewed off the record, top secret, by the United States Air Force, after he told the United States Air Force, no wonder you clods miscalculated the yield that you got on Castle Bravo? He said that I am using plasmas, first of all, as a transducer for what he called the 0 point energy. That's one of the first usages of that term, is in that interview by that Nazi scientist. Okay. Wow. And then on top of that, he says, I'm rotating my plasma and I'm inducing, here it comes, folks, the Lamore radio frequency precession into it. And that's how I'm getting my fusion. So in other words, he was using torsion. So my point here is, whatever they're telling you about the Large Hadron Collider and the Higgs boson and all this wonderful particle zoo and all the abstruse mathematics that you're supposed to ooh and ah over, I think there's a hugely hidden aspect of the CERN thing, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with particle physics. It has everything to do with geophysics, stellar physics, and torsion. Why? Because torsion is a rotating property in a plasma. What's the sun? It's a rotating plasma. Oh, by the way, it even has counter-rotating plasma.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so, Bell talk there, folks. So, come on. All you need to do is connect the dots.
Yeah.
All you need to do.
You've heard of the Mandela effect before.
Of course I have. Yes.
So I've often blamed the Cauldron Collider for the Mandela effect.
Same here.
I believe, okay, so in 2022, they turned it back on. It had been off for a while. Mm-hmm. And somebody had said to me, they said, Greg, you should use this time to set your agenda, because when they turn that back on, there's going to be so much energy that you can actually manifest your reality. And I was like, this sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, but you know what? I'm going to do it.
No, Look, in the third way, in my book, I actually describe what I call the the macro observer effect experiment. Okay. I believe that there is a level of the experiment at CERN that they are doing social data correlations as to when that accelerator is on. And that is the data that they are parceling out secretly to the scientists. And what do I mean by macro observer effect experiments? The observer effect is coming out of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You cannot observe the position and momentum of an electron at the same time. Okay. So in other words, before you even perform an experiment, you have determined what the result is that you're looking for. Now, can you scale that up to the macro scale of our common, everyday, ordinary sized universe? And if so, what would happen? Well, how would you do it? How would you do it? Well, one way to do it would be to alter memory, and to do so over a significant segment of the population. So what do? Well, you plant stories in this segment of the population. Nelson Mandela died in prison, and some people are going to remember Nelson Mandela died in prison. Or like me, I remember Bill Clinton getting out into the Rose Garden and announcing and eulogizing the passing of the famous White House press reporter, Helen Thomas. And she didn't die, but I remember it vividly. I remember Kirk, Michael Douglas, getting on the Tonight Show, talking about the death of his famous father, Kirk Douglas, and Kirk Douglas was still alive. Now, I'm not the only one that remembers these things, by the way.
Right.
So what happens when you start playing around then with actual physical memory of a system? If you decide, if you are making decisions informed on a false memory, it's going to have a macro effect. That's my point. And possibly, this was the whole basis for that science fiction television series Fringe, where you had a whole macro effect universe colliding with another universe in another timeline because the macro effect had been compromised in one of those universes. So do I think there is a possibility that they've been playing around with those types of experiments in conjunction with CERN? You betcha. If you're a manager in a casino, you know what happens on full moons. If you're a policeman, you know what happens on full moons. Yep. So you're going to tell me that a bunch of scientists are going to turn on a multi-million gigawatt particle accelerator with magnetic fields the size of the planet, if not much, much larger, and not do social correlation data experiments? You betcha they are. And might some of those experiments be designed to affect the macro reality in conjunction with things like Mandela effect? You betcha they will. You betcha.
When I look at all of this going on, we've got CERN. We've got things like artificial intelligence. We've got things like digital ID and this whole disclosure nonsense. All of these social narrative trends, all of this technology coming in, these items to me don't seem as though they are being put into place by somebody or something that has the best intentions for mankind.
Of course not.
This totally seems to me.
His name is Lucifer.
Thank you. Thank you. All of this seems to me that there is some kind of intelligence in the background engineering all of this for the final subjugation of mankind.
Michaels, how far is Brookhaven from you in Long Island?
Probably about 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Yeah, there's some.
I'd say about 40
there.
minutes, depending where you are in the boroughs.
Yeah. So are you aware? Because I know there was multiple colliders on Earth.
Yeah. Yep.
One's in Brookhaven in Long Island.
Yep.
There's Switzerland, France. There's Keck, Japan, Beijing, China, and then there's smaller medium colliders in Italy. The Fermi Electra. ELSA is in Germany, and VEP is in Russia. Now, those are more synchrotrons, but they still have magnetic fields.
Right.
I'm going to map these out sometime, Joseph, and figure out if there's even something with a mapping in the way that would sync with the holes we're seeing in like the Southern Atlantic anomaly. I wonder if we're seeing a flip on the Southern Atlantic anomaly towards the Indian Ocean, caused from all this stuff being up north. Are we seeing a weakening naturally there? So thank you. You've given me a lot to think about.
I also wonder why they decided to place CERN so close to Alsace-Lorraine.
Explain why you're thinking.
Isn't CERN placed relatively close to Alsace-Lorraine?
Yes.
I'm wondering, and I'm not asking for an answer, but I'm wondering why that region has always been at the forefront of some kind of conflict in Europe, and now they place CERN there. You had it during World War I. This was a contested area, the Ruhr area. That whole strip, I think, has some kind of esoteric or energetic significance.
There are people that have questioned the same thing, and I do think there's something to it, but I have no idea what it would be. The rock that the Hadron Collider is embedded in, it's in a kind of a piezoelectrically active type of rock. At least part of it is. Alsace-Lorraine, I don't know, but part of that, I think, is also, my French grandmother is Alsatian, or I should say was Alsatian, and her mother was German Alsatian. So, I've got that whole region's blood flowing in my veins. That region itself, I strongly think that part of the lore and curiosity about it is that old Lotarian kingdom that Charlemagne divided amongst his 3 sons. There's something about that kingdom that lives on, and I don't know what it is. I'm equally as perplexed as you are, Chris, about that region.
It just seems like a hotbed.
It is
for all of this.
It is. Yeah.
So, my personal opinion, and this is where I think we'll sort of start to land our show here after Greg asks his very, very pointed questions at the end.
They weren't pointed up till now, folks.
Yeah, right.
We've been dabbling with the blunt end of the probes here.
And then now we're really sharpening things.
Now we're really getting down.
Let me sharpen my pencil here.
Yeah. What do you think? All of these things combined, I mean, we have the secret space program. I personally think that artificial intelligence is not just on the corporeal plane. I think it is being able to channel, and also a lot of these people like Altman and Peter Thiel, they say it's a medium to communicate with extra-dimensional entities, or they floated that idea. I mean, I'm paraphrasing.
Elon Musk was bold and said that.
Right.
He right and said it.
So, to me, what this looks like is that they're preparing for some kind of event, and they did not put the chips on humanity to survive it. They have their own elite cliques. They think that they're going to survive it. They're going to push artificial intelligence. They're going to push robots. That's why all of this is coming out right now. And it's also why we have this thing like carbon credits, green cities, 15-minute cities, electric vehicles. They did not bet the farm on humanity. So now they're trying to basically take over every single resource in the global commons and put it towards the creation of data centers, artificial intelligence for this new humanity that is about to erupt. What are your thoughts on where all of this could potentially be heading? Because to me, it seems like they are hell-bent for leather to get all of this stuff pushed through within 5 years.
Well, it's rather obvious what they're doing, isn't it? They're building a new Tower of Babel.
Yep.
That's what they're doing. And it's going to end up the same way as the last one. If for no other reason than that there is an inbuilt morality in the cosmos. That's why it's called the cosmos. Cosmos is the Greek word for order, opposite of chaos. There's an inbuilt morality. Fundamentally, you can't twist it into something absolutely evil, because evil can never be absolute. Only good is absolute. So, the dualistic experiment that they're engaged upon is going to come a cropper, just like all other dualistic experiments that mankind has tried in the past. And I've also said many times, Chris, that, to me, what they are trying to do is they're trying to follow what they believe is the template of action of the end times. And they're trying to do a kind of false fulfillment of it so that they end up on top. And by the way, when I say false fulfillment, they are trying to falsely fulfill all eschatological expectation, not just biblical, Quranic, Vedic, you name it. There is a way to do it, and that's what I think they're about. The problem, and again, I'm going back to something that C.S. Lewis said, and if any one of the Inklings saw all this coming, he did. Tolkien certainly as well, but Lewis said something to the effect once that beware if you try and call down high heaven upon your heads, because it might show up, or something to that effect. And that's what they're trying to do. They are trying to invoke all these old powers, and to them, science is the way to do it. And I wrote that back in my book, Grid of the Gods. That whole book begins with a little paragraph about modern science and the relationship to magic. That's what they're trying to do. So, don't be surprised if something nasty shows up. And if the something nasty shows up, it's going to bring all sorts of really powerful good things in tow, but we're going to be like little ants caught between. I hate to break it to you folks, but that's the way she goes. The other thing I've said many times, Chris, is people really don't get that all of my books are related, including the theological ones. That's the part that people don't latch on to. Yeah. But they are all related, and I've said many, many times about this idea of the cosmic war. Mankind is both the battlefield and the prize.
Right.
There's one thing about mankind that if you read even the Islamic tradition about Iblis, which is their name for the devil, why does Iblis revolt against God? Well, it's actually in Islam that says his revolt is because he was angry and jealous of the creation of man. That's where that comes from. And the question is why? Well, we're not really told. But I have a sneaking suspicion it might have something to do with something called the incarnation. Just speculating there.
Yeah. That's some cliffhanger they give everybody.
That's some cliffhanger. Yeah. Here, we're going to come up to this point and leave you there, folks. Now, that it may be answered in Islamic tradition. I don't know. I'm not an expert on Islamic tradition. You'd have to ask an imam. But I that's my impression from what I have encountered of it and what they've written about Iblis. But everybody is you look at those old traditions, in the Vedic thing, we're coming up on the Kali Yuga, and that's not going to be a very nice period of time, and it's going to be a long period of time too. So, everybody's kind of sensing things are headed in the wrong direction, and the global elites are thinking the direction we're headed in is just fine. Thank you very much.
It's evolution.
Lead us, evolution, lead us up the future's endless stair. Chop us, change us, prod us, lead us. Nobody knows where to whatever variation our posterity may turn. crusty or crustacean to that great unknown God we yearn. On and on and on. I love that poem, by the way.
Who's that by?
C.S. Lewis.
C.S.
Oh,
Lewis,
oh,
Yeah, go look. It's titled Evolution.
Well, when you were talking earlier, I was thinking Ray Bradbury, by the pricking of my thumb, something wicked this way comes.
This way comes,
Yeah.
yes.
It's, I have a couple different things. One, I have one question I want to ask that has nothing to do with how I wanted to kind of end the conversation today. And it's just because it's a curiosity, because it keeps coming up in conversations with people on shows that I'm doing. I don't know where this first originated, this idea, if it was made up by somebody or if it appears in ancient text, but the Akashic records.
Yes.
Where did this first appear? Because I have not been able to track down, if this is something that is like new agey the last 100 years, or if it actually exists in history books a long time ago. People were talking about this in the spiritual realm.
3 words: Helena Petrona Blavatsky.
There you go.
Theosophy. Yes. Theosophy. She in turn claims to be getting it, and I think there's a very good case to be made for it, that she's getting it from readings of some of the Vedic texts. There's that famous passage, for example, in the Bhagavad Gita about the knower and the field, which is I think one of the most very beautiful passages in the Bhagavad Gita. But it's from there and that doctrine, and I think to a certain extent you could say that it's coming out of also certain strains of Mahayana Buddhism. So with Blavatsky, you're getting somebody that's going to grab this thing here and that thing there, and kind of stir it together in a stew, which she does in this case. But that's where I think that particular term comes from.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to look that up a little bit more now.
Yeah.
I'm just going to frame my mind around this. All right. So I want to take you as we wrap up today. I don't know. This was just on my heart to do this with you. I've done this with a couple guests throughout the years, and I don't think anyone's ever asked you these type of questions in any interviews that I watched. And I was like, well, you know what? If people want a unique way to wrap this would be good. I want to take you on basically let's talk about 5 parts of your legacy. And first would be your personal journey. Obviously I met you about 1.5 years ago, was familiar with your work much longer. But looking back, you as a child, what inspired you to be so inquisitive? What inspired you to try to unearth hidden history? What was it about your upbringing that led you to where you are today in life?
Well, it was, my father was an engineer and an architect, construction engineer and an architect. And he was the first person in our family after the Irish part of it came over that actually had a college education. And he was also quite literally a genius. He graduated college, I don't know how many grades or years ahead of most people graduating from college. So he was a very intelligent man. One of the things that happened, and this is something that I remember very vividly. My parents would play cards. They would play 5-point pitch every Friday night with some friends of theirs in Sioux Falls, another couple. The husband in that couple was the local television station electrical engineer. And he had worked for the British during World War II, developing radar. And he literally designed and built by hand the first local television color transmitter in this country in the 1970s. So this was another, nerd geek, wow, very brilliant guy. And I think one of the things that set me out definitely was one night they're playing cards, and somehow my dad and this other guy started talking about the Great Pyramid and how it was just engineered to the hilt. So that was one thing that kind of lodged in my brain. The other thing that lodged at a very early day in my development was I was baptized Roman Catholic. I was raised in the the old Methodist Episcopal Church, which was Methodism before it went wacky and joined the Evangelical United Brethren and started ordaining women and fire hydrants and zebras and everything they could ordain. It was a very, very traditional sort of church. And then all of a sudden, bang, overnight it changed after that merger. And so, and I used to love to go to church, largely because I was just fascinated by, the ritual and the pipe organ. I used to have my parents sit so I could watch the organist play. So all of that changed. And so I'm wondering why. And then my nephews showed up for Christmas one year with their family in tow, and we're going to the Christmas Eve service, which was the last one I ever went to at that service because it was just one parade of abominable heresy after another. I don't know, not even heresy. It was just awful. I mean, they rolled this birthday cake down the aisle with 2,000 candles on it as the youth choir got up on top of the altar and did a little dance and sang a little number called Happy Birthday Baby Jesus. And I'm 9 years old and this is supposed to appeal to me.
Oh gosh.
And they're singing and swaying back and forth, and they're wearing their Vatican II burlap. So at that point, I decided, something's going on here, because my little Lutheran nephews were equally appalled at what was going on. And so I started reading in high school. I decided, we've got all these churches, and I've got all these evangelo-Zionist friends of mine that are trying to get me saved. And, I just can't conjure up enough emotion to give me the oomph to satisfy them. I just can't do it. I'm not a revivalist. And besides, I'm thinking, I've always thought this way. I've always been a Christian. I don't need your oomph. So I decided I'm going to start reading in theology and decide, which one of these churches makes the most sense. So I went out, literally. This is when I was about 15 years old. I went to the local bookstore in Sioux Falls that catered to, the Bible crowd. But it was run by a bunch of Lutherans. So it was a very unusual Bible crowd that they were catering to. So I bought a set of Thomas Aquinas' Summa Contra Gentiles. I bought the Lutheran Book of Concord, which is the book of their confessions, if you're in the Missouri Synod.
Very light reading.
Yeah. Oh, tell me about it. And I bought Calvin's Institutes. And I sat down and I started reading these things. And the first thing I'm noticing is, okay, none of these people are agreeing with each other. And they're all citing the same church father. This is where it really began for me. That was St. Augustine. So in other words, I thought, okay, they've got something in common because they all come up with the same problems over and over and over, and they never get anywhere. So I thought, that's interesting. In the meantime, as I'm doing all this, I had finally figured out, hey, I was baptized Roman Catholic. So I went to my father because I knew that he had been one. And I said, where was I baptized? He said, well, you're baptized at St. Joseph's Cathedral. So I said, okay. So, and I don't know if you've ever been to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. You can go online and look at the inside of St. Joseph's Cathedral. This is just this massive church, and stuck up on a hill in Sioux Falls, and it's a beautiful church on the inside. So I decided one day I was going to walk up to the rectory, which was a long walk. And I went to the rectory to get my baptismal certificate because I was going off to college and I wanted to explore, maybe being confirmed. So I walked up to the rectory. I was met by Monsignor McEnany. He was quite a character, I gotta tell you. And none of the other cathedral staff were there. He was alone in the office that day, and he met me at the door with his glasses, pulled down like this. And he had his Roman collar on and everything. He kind of growled at me. He says, yes. I introduced myself. I said who I was, and I was here to get my baptismal certificate. And he just kind of sighed, and he said, okay. So he invited me in. I know this is a long story, but it's to the purpose. So he goes downstairs into the records part of the cathedral, and I can hear him rummaging around for a while, and he finally finds it. He comes back up, and he fills out a duplicate certificate and stamps it for me. And just as he's handing it to me, and just as I'm ready to reach for it, he pulls it back and he says, I don't recall you ever being here, boy. I said, no, sir. And he says, well, do you go to St. Francis? I said, no. He said, well, do you go to Holy Cross? And I said, no. And he just kind of looks at me. He says, you're not Catholic, are you, boy? And I said, well, no, Monsignor, I'm not. And he hands the certificate to me, and he leans, and I'll never forget this. He leans over and kind of looks to both sides. He says, well, with a name like Joseph Patrick Farrell, you don't need to be. It was quite a character. But anyway, so I took my baptismal certificate. I went off to college, and another kick in the pants that got me on the reading of ancient texts was when I got to college. I had chosen a college in the South, not knowing much of anything about American evangelical culture. I just wanted to study the organ, okay, in a small, nice little place where I could be left alone. So I chose this little Southern college. And
I'm curious, did you choose to study the organ because of the cathedral?
No, the organ at St. Joseph's, that's the new one. That's not
that's
the one.
That's the new one. Okay, this is absolutely beautiful. I had to look it up.
Yeah, it is a lovely. Yeah, that's the organ loft at St. Joseph's Cathedral now, but it's not the one that was there when I was familiar with it. But anyway, no, I grew up loving the pipe organ. That was the instrument for me in the Methodist Church, because and to this day I love organ. So I went to the Southern College. And I literally, on the very first day that I'm there, I went to the lunch line. I got my lunch. I got my tray. I come off the lunch line, and I go into the cafeteria, and I sit down, and I cross myself and say a little prayer. And when I, open my eyes after the prayer, literally leaning over the table on the other side of the lunch table, leaning in towards me with his eyes just agog with horror, was this guy who said, my name is such and such. Are you saved? I mean, that was literally the reception I got. And, I had literally no idea up to that point of what evangelicalism was and how very different it was. So I literally cut my theological teeth trying to respond to these people's questions. And in the meantime, I went out to the local Catholic church to Mass, and I go in, and, the priest is cleaning up, and there was a little smell of incense in the air. And I presented my certificate to him and said, I'd like to take some catechism confirmation classes. And the priest looks at it and he says, well, I'm not so sure that you know what you're doing. And I said, well, you're a priest, aren't you? And he says, yes. And I said, well, put me in the class and confirm me. He says, well, first of all, only the bishop can do that, and I'm not a bishop. And he looks at the certificate and he says, I think you're a bit confused because I'm an Episcopalian priest. The Catholic Church here lets us meet and use their church after they get done with their Mass. So I started, and as I learned more about Episcopalianism, I decided, well, this is for me, because I'll be very blunt, I just have too many doctrinal difficulties with infallibility and some other changes that the Roman Church made after the schism. And they were made by Rome, not by us. And they are problematic in the extreme. So I joined the Episcopal Church literally 4 months before the General Convention of 1976 gave us women priests, and they started ordaining women and zebras and fire hydrants. So I was back to the same old thing.
Yep.
And I kept saying, what is it with these churches that are changing things they don't need to change? You know, at that point, I really started reading theology, and I changed my major from music to theology. And not simply for that reason. I had some real difficulties with the organ professor there too. But anyway, so that was it. And in the course of reading Anglican dogmatics, I was exposed to a way of thinking from the church fathers that was not Augustinian. In other words, it was not based on the system and thinking of St. Augustine of Hippo Regius. So, and that was the other thing that in that college I noticed. All these fundamentalists, there was one church father that they all liked and read, and that was Augustine. And I thought, well, if this guy is causing all this trouble, there has to be something wrong with him. So when I started reading the church fathers, I read the Greek fathers and all of the Latin fathers except Augustine. And so when I got to Augustine, I could easily see what the problems were. And that eventually was what led me to Eastern Orthodox Catholicism. So that interest in turn, as I'm reading these fathers, especially the Greek ones, they start talking about things like, well, there's giants and we got angels and they don't really exist in any sort of dimension like we do. And I'm thinking, what is all of this?
Yeah.
So I started reading all these other things that they kept mentioning. And that's what got me started on this, this harebrained career I'm on. And, that eventually awakened that conversation about the pyramid that my father and his engineering friend were having, and so on and so forth. So it's been kind of a thing that slowly congealed over several years. And it took off back at the turn of the millennium when I was a casino manager and got let go from that job. I was actually fired for pointing out some non-compliance issues that they were having with the gaming commission. So, shuffle him out of here real quick. But I started writing. I wrote the Giza pyramid books as kind of a fleshing out of things that my father and his engineering friend had talked about way, way, way back when. And I honestly, Greg, I did not expect this to become a career. I wanted to be an academic, with my patches on my suede chute and smoking pipes and living in the library and seeing. That's what I wanted. I never, ever in my wildest days expected this to become a full-time career, ever. It happened entirely by accident. But in a way, I can see why, because I am such a traditionalist and a curmudgeon theologically. I never would have fit in the modern American academy at all. Right. I did teach for a period of time in an Orthodox seminary, but there too I was let go because, well, let's just say I saw some financial indiscretions. Oh. And even that blew up into this church-wide financial fracas that went on and on for years, and all I had done was try to correct it. And you will not, if you examine that fracas, you will not find my name mentioned at all. They've kept that quietly out of the picture. There are a few people that know. Right. But I'm here to tell you, when I wrote that memo and sent it off to the headquarters, the next thing I know is, we're preparing an ecclesiastical trial for you. So, what did I do? Right. Oh, I've been through it all. I know where the bodies are buried.
Well, that leads me to something that I had jotted down to ask you. And I'm going to kind of change my question a little bit in the framework of what you just shared about your growing up and hearing your father talk about this, and then church experiences. What have you learned throughout your career about the interplay between knowledge, power, and society? Like, as you're looking at ancient covert technologies, ancient teachings, covert teachings that have been hidden from the public, what do you think that reveals about the human role of knowledge, power, and society? How's that shaped worldview for you? How's that changed?
I think the biggest thing is that knowledge is. I despise hypocrisy. Particularly, we're all hypocrites at some level. But what I'm talking about is institutional hypocrisy. And by that, I mean, if I'm sitting down at dinner and having a discussion with a Roman Catholic bishop, I want that bishop to be Roman Catholic. I may be strongly disagreed with him, which I am, but I at least want him to be a true representative of what he's claiming to be. If I sit down and listen to a Lutheran pastor, I want him to be Lutheran, not trying to be Methodist and everything else but Lutheran. So institutional hypocrisy above all other things bothers me. Why? Because what it is it's a form of knowledge that does not result in action, that is condign or consistent with that knowledge. And when you're in that state, you're introducing not just hypocrisy into the state of your own soul, you're introducing a schism into your soul. It's a kind of literal schizophrenia. You're of a divided mind. And this, I think, you look at things everywhere. People know certain things are wrong. They know certain things are counterproductive or evil or not practical or what have you. And they go ahead and do them anyway because everybody else is doing them. Well, by golly, no. So most of my career has just been one big no. I'm not a modernist. I will not go along with your changes. I don't care how many of you and how many of your churches do. I will not. Because that is my baptismal vow. Pure and simple.
I mean, you've got a Promethean gene in you. Is rare to come by.
There is an expression in the Latin, Athanasius contra mundum, Athanasius against the world, because at a certain period in church history during the middle of the 4th century, virtually everybody in the Christian church was an Arian, and that is a form of Christianity that rejected the deity of Christ. And it was Athanasius, the Bishop of Alexandria, who was one of these people that said, no, I don't care how many of you out there are going along with this doctrine. I will not, because it is not the doctrine of the church. It is not the tradition. So in other words, I think at some point we have to understand that regardless of what institution we're talking about, most of us are probably right now concerned with our country and the direction it is going. And we have to understand that there are some things that we must be willing to fight for and to die for. And that's what we're lacking. That's what we're lacking. There are lots of things plenty of people are ready to kill for, but there's a difference between that and dying for something. And I think we're fast approaching that stage where we're going to be forced to make that kind of choice, especially in this country.
How does your understanding of where we are as a country right now, with human nature, with morality, moral relativism, where do you see the trajectory of civilization based upon history and patterns of where the future might be going?
Well, I think it's going down the crapper. Back when my friend George Ann Hughes was still alive and I was doing all sorts of interviews on her show, I would make the observation numerous times, and I still believe it, that, it was Bishop Fulton Sheen, I think, that once said that humanity goes through these cycles about once every 500 years. And I'm old enough. I know that many people in your audience are probably not old enough to remember Bishop Sheen. I remember him because I used to watch him on TV all the time. And he said that humanity would go through these 500-year cycles every now and then. And he pointed out that we're fast coming up on another one. And I think, we're at the end of this 500-year cycle that began with the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. Okay. What's unique about this one is that the end of this 500-year cycle is also correspondent or coincident with the end of a much longer cycle of several millennia. So qualitatively, the end of this cycle is unlike any previous thing in known human history. This is why I have the fascination with, ancient high civilizations and so on, because I don't think we've been at this point since that civilization. So it is qualitatively and quantitatively much larger than anything we've been through in our known history since then. Where it's going to go depends a lot on what people think the proper diagnosis of why we got here is. For myself, I think a lot of it is precisely the theology, the common religious mind of the West and what it shares. That would be something possibly for another discussion. But, when I was a theology professor, I used to give what I called theological Rorschach inkblot tests. Okay. And I did that to show people, regardless if they were agnostic or atheists, that they had far more in common with each other than any of them had in common with the ancient Orthodox Church of the East. So in other words, there's a massive cultural shift in the West, and it ultimately, I think, is theological in nature. And we can point to things like the Enlightenment and Kant and Schopenhauer and things like that. But if you look long and hard enough, those are coming out of that Augustinian religious mind. Right. That unfortunately the West made the mistake of equating with the mind of the church. That's the problem.
All right, so here's my last two areas I want to go. And I told you this in the green room. Okay, picture Mount Rushmore, right? We put, four figures on Mount Rushmore for people to look at for history. If you could pick four things that you've uncovered in your life, four principles, teachings, whatever it may be, that leave for another generation, what are the four things Joseph Farrell has discovered that are worth making sure that people pay attention to?
I can think of one right off the top of my head, and this is what I wrote most of my theological works about, and that's the filioque. You know what the filioque is?
No, I don't.
Okay. In the Nicene Creed, which you say at Mass, you come down to the third article of the Creed. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord and giver of life, who proceedeth from the Father and the Son.
And the Son. Yep.
And the Son. That's filioque in Latin. That change is a profound change in the doctrine of God himself. It is not original to the Nicene Creed, and it is not part of Scripture. It is not. And the West says it is, and that's the problem. You have a change in the doctrine of God himself. And the West will say, well, it's not even really that important. We're saying and believing the same things as you Orthodox. But notice the West never asks us what we think. So when I discovered that, I said, this is everything from Joachim of Fiore to Hegel's dialectic to the checks and balances within the American constitutional system. You name it, this is it. And along with it comes the idea of an inherited guilt, the so-called sin nature of original sin. And this, too, is part of the Western mentality, the Western inheritance. What you inherit from Adam and Eve is death, not sin. So there's another thing. This, in turn, affects the way you view Christ and his work, and therefore divine predestination and human free will, and therefore law, and therefore science, and therefore pretty much everything. So in other words, there is a theological mentality that is Christian that is not Western. You will not understand Russia until you understand that. You will not even understand the Middle East until you understand that. You will not be able to sort any of this out, and you will not understand why the Roman Church right now is in such a mess, and it is, until you understand that. You will not. And I have said over and over again, everybody, all of my books are related deliberately, and that includes especially the theological ones. When you see what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, you won't understand it without the theological books. You won't. Can't. There are a few people that have latched onto it that finally got it. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of asking the questions, or even more importantly, asking them in their proper order. You want proper order? The improper order is enshrined in Thomas Aquinas's great Summa, and that same order is reproduced in every book of Anglican, Lutheran, Presbyterian, and even Dallas dispensationalist dogmatics. It's the same order of questions. When you turn that order upside down, which is actually right side up, you get a very different way of thinking. So spout all the Bible verses that you wish. If you're doing it from a wrong framework, you're going to get the wrong answer. So in other words, theology is like Cantor numbers. If you've ever played around with transfinite numbers, you'll notice that they are not commutative. You have to do the numbers and the operations in an order to get the correct answer, and that order has to be rigorously followed. If you jumble the orders, or if you think they're commutative, you get wrong answers. Why does the West constantly argue over predestination and free will? Every 200 years, you have another big blow up about it. And it's the same answers repeated over and over again. No one read Karl Barth, by the way, a Protestant theologian for whom I have great respect. You know what Barth said once?
What's that?
This is a wonderful this is typical Barth. He appeared at a theological conference at the University of Chicago, of all places, back then, a dispensationalist stronghold. And after Professor Barth's presentation, an angry student stood up and said, "Professor Barth," because this was a typical accusation that was constantly leveled against him, which of course was untrue, but it was constantly leveled against him. The student angrily stands up and says, "Professor Barth, you don't really believe that God is going to save everybody in the end, do you?" You know what Barth's response was? "Well, you wouldn't be mad at him if he did, would you?"
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. Now, he never said any such thing, but that response is classic, and it's indicative of his mentality.
Right.
Because he was imbibing of a lot of that non-Augustinian mentality that I've been trying to get at. You know, the confessions are wonderful, but the theology in the De Trinitate and against Pelagius and De Synodis and against the Donatists, all of that stuff is highly problematic. But that's the stuff the West latched on to. And now you've got infallible popes. Well, you don't need infallible popes unless you're planning to do what? Change the religion.
Change the society as a result.
Change the society as a result. Absolutely. That's why at Vatican II, when you're reading about all the wonderful, glorious ecumenical stuff, the traditional, quote unquote, traditional language of papal infallibility is there front and center.
Right.
Right.
So I think you're choosing for your Mount Rushmore here, if I'm hearing it correctly. You started with the term philoque, which means "and the sun," and you're stating that the West, it should be just starts
From
and
the Father.
ends with the Father, and then the Father grants the Holy Spirit from there. Okay, I understand that.
The monument I would put up on Mount Rushmore is the monument that Pope St. Leo III put up in the old St. Peter's Lateran Basilica. It was of the Creed in Latin and the Greek, both, without that doctrine. And in the center, he erected another shield that said, His scutos ego Leo fide orthodoxe captella et amore. I, Leo, have erected these shields out of a love for and to preserve the Orthodox faith. A pope. Those shields were taken down at the moment that Rome went into schism from the church. And notice my language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. What I love about the answer that you just provided for everybody that's followed your work for a long time, they're probably waiting for you to give an answer where it's kind of like, oh, let's talk 0 point energy, or let's talk about the Giza Death Star. But you're really going foundational and asking people to do that.
Yes.
And so I hope that's not lost on listeners and viewers that's really inspirational.
I put things very bluntly and very dramatically and forcefully because I'm trying to wake people up from this theological slumber and illiteracy that they're in. Well, yes. This is not to say that I have no sympathy for traditionalist Roman Catholics or Lutherans or what. I have a great deal of sympathy for you because I've been there. I've been in many of those churches that I've watched collapse. And I started asking why. I'm not satisfied that I've got to change just for the sake of change, which was the answer I was getting from the pulpit. Right. Because being a young man, I liked the old way. I liked the old music. I liked the these and the thous. I liked the burlap to be put in the closet and to have the brocade. All of that is what I like.
Right. So,
when I say I'm a traditionalist curmudgeon, I mean it.
I like it. All right. So my final question for today, say there's a young person that finds this today and they're reaching your work for the very first time. They've been curious after they've seen it and watched the interview. If there's a young scholar out there or a curious mind, doesn't have to be a young scholar, and they want to follow somewhat in your footsteps as far as methodology, mindset, your principles. We just heard a little bit about your principles, by the way, there. What advice would you give those individuals that they need to adopt in order to be able to have a scholarly conscience?
Number one, trust no institution, especially now, because all institutions, including the churches, every single one, are co-opted. Number one. So that means you have to be responsible to learn the traditional narrative of whatever institution that you're dealing with from the ground up and for yourself. And that requires a lot of reading. So there's no getting around the hard work involved. And that's what scholarship is. It's hard work. It's at Oxford, they don't ask you, what do you want to major in? That's America. That's have your name ticked off in the roll call book and attend so many classroom hours in order to get your degree. At Oxford, they ask you, what do you want to read? And that's what you're going to do. You're going to read. And then at the end of 3 years, you're going to sit for a week. You're going to sit one exam that lasts an entire week on that subject area. And they're going to ask you essay questions, and you're going to have to write essays. And they're going to be graded by a human being looking at your answers and not a computer checking off the little number 2 lead pencil ovals and squares that you filled in on your standardized test. That's real scholarship. So you're going to have to do it yourself, folks, because no one in this culture is even able, for the most part, to do that sort of traditional pedagogy anymore, regardless of what the subject is, theology, biology, sociology, I don't care what it is. They are all compromised. You have to understand that. And I am not exaggerating when I say that. And number two, because of that, if you get to a certain plateau, you're going to have to learn how to connect dots. You're going to have to relearn the ancient lost art of thinking analogically. You want to deal with analogia entis, go read Aquinas, and he'll give you a whole treatise on it. So if you're going to do this kind of work, you have to train your mind how to think analogically. And personally, I can think of no better way to do that than to listen to classical music, particularly of the 18th century, because that's pattern music, and you've got to train your mind to recognize patterns and all of their permutations. So that's key. The second thing I think you must be aware, in addition to the co-option of so many of our institutions, this means a deep and steep personal commitment on the part of the individual pursuing that course, that if you're going to be an autodidact, this commits you to, first of all, not being afraid to call out institutional hypocrisy when you see it. And that means, like it or not, you're going to be letting yourself in for a very lonely life. Trust me, I've experienced it. I'm sure that you guys have experienced it. The life itself will draw, however, will, by the nature of its case, we're talking topology here. You are becoming a basin of attraction for a certain kind of individual once word gets out about what kind of individual you are. So you're going to draw certain kinds of people to you by nature of the case, and they're going to have common interests. They're going to have a common standard that they want other people to live up to and to be aware of. So that will happen. You'll be lonely, but at the same time, you will have people drawn to you that are seeking that sort of thing. And there's a lot more out there than you can imagine. We're watching as we speak this sort of thing happening in the United States right now, particularly among the young people. The problem that the young people don't realize is that the old bearers of tradition are not there anymore. And that's particularly the case of institutions like the churches that should be bearers of tradition and that aren't. So this is something that, you're just going to have to live with if you go down this path. And that's my warning to people.
I think the big message here for everybody is to be able to have and develop the skill of discernment.
Yes, absolutely. Here. Yeah.
I think for me, and I think many others, the litmus test in recent memory has been COVID.
Yes.
I did not buy anything. None of it.
Yep, I agree. Absolutely. Well said. Discernment is key, and this is the thing I think that genuine traditional scholarship inculcates is you begin to acquire, and none of us ever finish acquiring it, but you begin to acquire this kind of a sense of discernment of what's genuine and what's not, and it grows over time, and it grows with experience. So I wholeheartedly think discernment. I agree with you. That's a key thing.
And I also think trusting in yourself.
Yes,
because so many people do not validate that little voice inside of their head that say, "Hey, wait a minute, this doesn't smell. This dog don't hunt." And I think it's been drilled out of us. I think it's been ground up into oatmeal because you don't have a PhD in the topic you want to comment on. You don't have the letters after your name. But I have Google. I'm allowed to read.
what is the worth of the letters anymore now from these compromised bastions of wokery and quackademy?
Look at the psychology community. That's all the evidence
bingo.
you need.
Yeah, bingo. You don't need the letters behind your name. And in fact, I would say now, given the state of the contemporary quackademy in the West, they're probably inhibitive to genuine learning rather than promotive of it. So yeah, that's the other thing. And about trusting your mind, I used to tell my students back in my teaching days, Chris, all the time, trust your mind. Trust it. Don't think that just because you think an idea is crazy or far-fetched, don't think that it really is. Put it out there. Flesh it out. Explore it. Go dig into it.
Right.
Trust your mind. You've got to do that. Otherwise, you're cannon fodder for some PhD quack from Harvard or someplace that's going to come along and fill your head with all sorts of nuttery. Come on.
I remember when I was getting my master's degree,
Mhm.
I would take quotes out of context
Mhm.
just to prove my point, and I would get A's simply because I quoted something, I cited it correctly, and as long as I was kind of veering in the direction that the professor's opinion was in, I mean, this was great. I got a gold star every time.
Here's an even funner way of doing that. Use quotations not only out of context, but don't tell people who they're from. And particularly if you're trying to make a negative point that something is wrong or incorrect or untrue or cockamamie or whatever, use a quotation from the very authorities that your opponents respect that document the point, and don't share who it's from.
It sounds brilliant.
I did that once in a graduate school. I'm not going to mention where, or maybe at another time I'll mention where and what context. But in doing that with the professor, when I revealed who the quotation was actually from, the professor looked like I had punched him in the gut and took literally took two physical steps backward. And the look on the face was, I wish I had had a phone at the time and I could have taken a picture, and I would have put the caption beneath the picture, QED.
So it reminds me, in college, I was taking a theology class, and somebody mentioned, and I was a young 19, 20 years old, didn't know anything about the world or raising a family. So I think back now, the ignorance that I had, but this gives you my mindset. The professor said to us as he's teaching theology, he said, do you think that a parent should be able to use daycare to help raise a child? And it just got into a conversation. And I said, I think daycare is akin to putting your dog in a kennel. When the dog learns bad values, and the dog starts biting somebody, you have to look at somebody else and say, well, it's them, they did this, and not take responsibility for yourself, which is the foundation. And I relate it back to the foundation of faith, that it starts with the parents. That we are the first teachers of the faith. And I kind of relate it all back. But there's a woman in there who was maybe in her mid-20s, late 20s, that had a child, and she was literally putting her kid in daycare so she'd come to college, and she started raising hell with me in the classroom. She did not like the fact that I put her, daycare in such a negative light, but I stood by it. And afterwards, the teacher actually came up to me, and he was basically said to me, he's like, thank you for holding your ground. He said, I'm glad you didn't buckle on that. And I said, well, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to give an opinion of this, how I see it.
The family is the little church.
Yep.
And this is why society is in such a mess. Because the priest of the family, the father, his role is no longer there. It's all got to be feminized.
Right. And
I'm sorry, ladies, this is where much of the current modern problems began, was that whole movement. And by the way, there were feminist theologians who took their development of anti-patriarchy precisely from some of the same structures as led to the filioque. Why? Well, it's a little thing called the doctrine of the monarchy of the father source, the patriarchia of the Godhead. That's where it starts. So huge. And I am hammering it, Greg, because I want this to be hammered home.
I'm so glad I asked you the question about Mount Rushmore now.
You dear Roman Catholic traditionalists, you're not going to fix your church until you really fix it and dig down into the doctrines causing you the trouble and the problems. That's where it's going to get fixed. And you got to start with the guy claiming to be infallible.
Yeah, watch, Michaels. I'm going to be Eastern Orthodox by the end of 2025.
No, I'm not. No, listen. Here's the problem. No. This is very serious. When I say all churches are co-opted, I mean it.
Yeah, I know. I know the Roman Catholic Church is co-opted because I worked in it.
Listen, I know the Eastern Orthodox Church is co-opted because I worked in that.
Yep.
And I have very few hierarchs or clergy that I trust within any of the Orthodox jurisdictions. I don't have trust for the ecumenical patriarchate as far as I can throw it.
Right.
So on and on we could go. My best friend in high school was a Missouri Synod Lutheran, and we got to be friends because we both liked pipe organs and would practice at local churches. I always admired him because he was quite staunch and very firm in his Lutheran faith. Probably much more so than the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church itself, but it was good to be exposed to that, because that's another thing that kind of, it's those little meetings that you have with people that convince you that, there's something about this guy and it's coming from that for some reason. I've got to find out why. It's those little things. And he had a big influence, I think, on me in that respect as well. So we're all in this, that's the problem. We're watching our country go down the toilet. We're watching the churches go down the toilet. We're watching our schools and our universities go down the toilet. So, we've got to figure out what it is we want to preserve. And the only way to do that is to read a lot and find out, where do we go wrong and what is it we're supposed to be preserving? Thank you, Al Hamilton.
Joseph, thank you very much for joining.
Thanks for having me back, guys, and for putting up with my harangues and rants.
No, this is great. I have so much homework to do now. I have to go back into the show, look up everything that you've been referencing, because I have a vague idea, but I don't have an assured idea, and that's my problem. I like to know. So I've got a ton of homework to do. I'm sure Greg has homework to do now.
Well, for the theological homework, read my tome, the 4-volume tome, God History and Dialectic.
Done.
That's actually kind of a transcript from the last course I ever taught for the University of Oklahoma, as a matter of fact. But if those are the subjects that interest people, read that. If you're interested in the angels, read the Demon in the Acre, Civil War, the Rialto books. They're all on my website.
Absolutely. And where is your website? Where can they find your books?
The website is www.gizadeathstar.com. That's all one word, GIZA deathstar.com. And they're under the About button on the website. Yeah, he's pulled it up. You'll see the books are there. Most of the books are going to come from Amazon, but I get a little extra royalty if you order them off the website. Some of them come from Lulu.
Yeah, please go directly through his website. Look.
Give me a few extra pennies.
Christmas is coming. Yeah, you need to do that.
Oh, don't remind me.
His dog needs good food here. His puppy needs
my dog. Listen, my dog eats better than I do. I'm serious. So
is mine.
If I ever invite you guys to dinner, make sure I'm not cooking it. I'm a horrible cook. My mother was a good cook, but it didn't rub off. Let me tell you.
Well, if you ever invite us, I will cook, because I can cook. So
okay, well,
there you go.
Deal. Okay,
then I'll take us out, because
here. Yes, I'll that even better. Yes, I love to eat out. Anyway.
All right, guys.
You're going to have to leave New York City. I ain't going there.
I'm not going up New York City. So that's
good. I see the background and I'm thinking, are you in Manhattan?
Absolutely not.
That's a relief.
That's a green screen.
Yeah, this is the wonders of technology. We've got a nondescript cityscape behind me.
Okay, well, this is good. I'm relieved to hear that. I was thinking, what's he doing?
Right. I rented out a bar to do this and kicked everyone out.
Okay. Thanks for having me back, guys.
All right, Joseph. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Greg, let me know when it's up.
Will do.
Greg is, as always, this is fantastic.
Yes.
I love when Joseph is here. Joseph is one of the best guests we have. He is always a fan and listener hit. So you can rest assured that Joseph will be coming back. And I think Greg has been in the artist's studio.
Always.
He's got a new song.
Well, no, it's our standby for Farrell. It's the
It's a
organ,
standby.
pipe organ.
I thought we were trying to develop a greatest hits album for
Well,
Joseph
eventually.
Farrell.
Oh, you did. You're going to play the postlude?
Yes, we had the postlude. Here it is, everybody. Everybody, be bold.
Deep in the archives where the shadows play, he digs through history, clears the gray. Ancient tech, forgotten lands, mysteries crumbling in his hands. From the Giza pyramids to cosmic schemes, financial warfare and hidden dreams, connecting dots where none appear. Dr. Farrell makes it clear. Dr. Joseph P. Farrell unveiling the truth, breaking down secrets with wisdom and proof. From ancient stones to banking lies, he's got the keys to open our eyes. Mysteries unravel at his command, following clues across every land. Truth seeker, fearless and bold, Dr. Farrell, the stories unfold. Black projects, hidden texts so vast, legacies buried in our past. Geopolitics, alchemy's flame, he maps it out, calls every name. Books like blueprints for the mind, guiding us through past confined. No stone unturned, no theory missed, Dr. Farrell tops the list. Dr. Joseph P. Farrell unveiling the truth, breaking down secrets with wisdom and proof. From ancient stones to banking lies, he's got the keys to open our eyes. He's a scholar, a rebel, a voice for the brave, uncovering secrets that time couldn't save. A legend, a thinker, a guide through the haze, Dr. Farrell.